I call the meeting of the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission to order. Could we have roll call, please?
Mr. Dossett?
Here.
Ms. Novak?
Here.
Ms. Peluso?
Here.
Mr. Seiler?
Here.
Mr. Shepherd?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Stoltz?
Here.
We have a quorum. All members are present. At this time, I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting. Could we all check our cell phones and silence things, please, if you haven't thought to do that already, so that we don't, commissioners and audience, please, to be sure that we're not ringing during the meeting. Thank you. We have no changes to the agenda, so the next item of business is approval of the minutes from the meeting of January 2nd. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move approval.
Second. I had one picky thing. Sorry. On page 3, in the middle it says, in the paragraph starting following discussion, it correctly states that Mr. Dossett and Ms. Smith made the motion and second. But then later it says that I made the motion and that Ms. Smith made the second. I think
That was on the name of the house.
I think technically that was, I made a suggestion for a friendly amendment, which was accepted by Mr. Dossett and Ms. Smith. Sorry. Do you accept the,
Sure, accept the friendly amendment. Ooh, these are hot.
who made the second?
Motion.
I did.
Do you accept the?
I do.
Okay. Okay. Any additional additions or corrections to the minutes? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes as corrected are approved as corrected. We have no written communications that don't pertain specifically to the two public hearings, and we'll hold those for the appropriate places. The next item on the agenda is audience participation. For those of you who haven't been to a commission meeting before, we call on you at this end, and you have to come up and speak clearly into the microphone, please, so that you're picked up on the cable TV. At some point, we need you at the beginning to state your name and your address, please, for the record. And we also then need you to sign in on the sheet that's up there as well with your name and address as well. At this time, I'll ask that if you're here to speak about either of the proposed local landmarks, that you hold your commentary for the public participation that's included within the public hearings. Am I still on? If you have any general participation that you'd like to talk about at this point, you're welcome to do so. If you'd like to speak about either of the applications, the more appropriate time to do that is within each of the public hearings, which will come up in a couple of minutes. Would anyone like to speak about something other than the two local landmark applications? Okay. We have no continued public hearings and no old business. I'm removing myself as chair right now and turning things over to our vice chair, Kim Smith. I am doing that because I have a conflict of interest with the two items of new business in the applications. Yes.
I don't know what how much time we're going to spend on the two cases. I'm wondering if, I'm kind of guessing that the sorority house might take more time. I wonder if we've switched them in the order, if there's any sense in that, but I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody here for the first.
I think we should probably leave things as they stand.
Okay, it's
right
fine
now.
with me.
Sorry. My conflict of interest is that I taught the class in which these two local landmark applications were produced. And I'll take the meeting back over after the two public hearings.
So you're going to have to bear with me. I haven't done this much. I would like to open the public hearing, case number HP-2013-L-01, an application to designate 1404 South Lincoln Avenue, Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House, as a local historic landmark Brianna Kraft is the applicant. The procedure for the public hearing is the staff will present a summary of the case. The nominator or the petitioner will be able to present their evidence. At that time, the owner or the owner's representative will have the opportunity to ask questions, but if the nominator or petitioner isn't here, if you have questions about the application, hopefully city staff can help with that. Other proponents of the request may then speak, and after all the proponents have spoken, then the owner or owner's representative will be allowed to question any new information that may have been presented. Opponents of the request may present after that, and at that time, the nominator or petitioner will have an opportunity to ask any questions of the opponent. And then after the proponents and opponents have spoke, anybody who has relevant information but they don't have, they aren't pro or oppose it, they may speak. Additional comments may be allowed by city staff for any clarification in response to new evidence. The nominator and the petitioner may present a summary of his or her petition. And questions from the commissioners can be directed at any time to an applicant, staff, or public to clarify evidence presented in the hearing. After this procedure, the public input shall be closed and there will be discussion by the commission. The commission will review all information presented pertinent to the nomination. If the property owners consent in writing to landmark designation and the HPC finds that the property conforms to one or more criteria set forth in Section 12 of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, the Historic Preservation Commission may make a final determination to designate the property as a historic landmark. Lacking written consent, the HPC shall recommend to the Urbana City Council whether to approve or deny the application. At that time, the City Council will then determine whether to designate the property by enacting the ordinance. Rebecca?
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening. Please let me know in the audience if at any time I'm not speaking loudly enough or the mic is not working. So we are here to begin this evening. Yes. Can you hear me now? No. Okay, we're just having a few technical difficulties. We'll check on that for a moment. Can you hear me now? No. Okay, sorry.
Mic's turned on.
The mic is turned on, but not working. Is it working but just quietly? It is. So if I speak really closely? Oh, okay. Clearly that's what I need to do. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So we are here this evening, first of all, to discuss 1404 South Lincoln Avenue, which is historically called the Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House, and that is HPC case 2013 L01. It's an application to designate as a local historic landmark the property. And it's an application that was submitted by Brianna Kraft. And unfortunately, she is not able to be with us this evening. She did write a letter to the Historic Preservation Commission explaining why she could not attend. She was a student at the university, and now that the classes have finished for the semester, she is in Washington, D.C. doing an internship, and so is not able to be here this evening. But her letter is in your packet. So the commission's job is to hold a public hearing on the application and to, at the public hearing, which we're at tonight, to take comments from all people that are connected to it, the nominator, the owner, any member of the public who wishes to be heard, and to also consider all written communications received prior to or during the public hearing. And we do have a number of communications, which I will refer to later. We also have a letter from the property owner that was submitted late this afternoon and that you received today, and I believe they are here this evening and they will be talking to you as well. So following the public hearing, the Preservation Commission should review all information presented to the Commission that is pertinent to the nomination and recommend to the City Council whether or not to designate the property as a local historic landmark based on the criteria laid out in the Historic Preservation Ordinance. So some background to the property. The sorority house was designed by local architect Joseph Royer. He is the most prestigious architect in Urbana in the late 19th and mid-20th to the mid-20th centuries. We in fact have a Royer Arts and Architecture District, which was, we have a brochure here. It was designated by the City Council in 2007 to, it's a district that mainly focuses around our downtown area, but it is to recognize Joseph Royer's contributions to our city's built environment, to the architectural heritage of Urbana. And we also have here, I brought this evening, a book that was published locally in 2010, 2011. Our author is right here, 2011. By Brian Adams on Joseph Royer, and it's a fantastic resource cataloging Royer's life and his architecture here in Urbana and in other parts of the country, mostly around central Illinois, but he does extend a little bit further, and that's all documented in here. In this document, in this book as well, is some discussion of the property that we're here to discuss this evening. Royer, when he lived his entire life in Urbana and graduated from the university here, and he was then the city engineer of Urbana, and while he was city engineer, he designed many of the civic buildings in our community, including the Urbana Free Library, the Champaign County Courthouse, the Landmark Hotel, which was originally called the Urbana Lincoln Hotel, the Champaign County Alms House, which it's still there. It's on East Main Street. It has a different use now. And many of our downtown buildings, including Tiernan's Block, the Masonic Temple, that's the building that the Crane Alley is in, which is one of our local landmarks, as is the hotel. Also the Cohen Building, Canaan Baptist Church, and the Unitarian Universalist Church. So he was the architect of the building. He designed the building. And he designed it for the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house. It was constructed in 1928 in the French eclectic architectural style, and I'm sure everyone here this evening is familiar with the property, but we'll go ahead and look at some photos anyway. So this is a picture that was included in the application. This is the main facade shortly after it was built in 1928. So you can see there the newer addition, which is now located right here, is not there. And here's what it looks like today. This was also, these photos were taken after we received the application by city staff. So here, this is the main facade. So this is the newer, these are the newer sections, and this is the original part of the building. It was built for the sorority as their chapter house. And so part of the significance of sorority houses, fraternity and sorority houses, Greek houses in general, is the impact and the importance of the Greek community on universities, university lifestyles here in the United States. In 1989, the National Register of Historic Places listed 6 local fraternity and sorority houses on the National Register as a multiple property listing. So what that means is that an application form was submitted documenting the importance of Greek houses to American collegiate life, and particularly to our community, because here in Urbana-Champaign we had the largest collection of Greek houses in the country. And so with this document, 6 individual fraternities and sororities were listed on the National Register, and it was submitted in such a way that there would be additional submissions later and that more properties would be added to the National Register listing. So at that time, the sorority that we're talking about this evening was included in that second category, that list of properties that had not been researched, extensively researched and documented to date, but that were potentially going to be included in that listing later. I did speak with our National Register representative in Springfield, Andrew Heckenkamp, and he did say that he thought that this property that the reason it was not listed was simply because the work had not been done, not because of questions of integrity or any other issues with it. So the house today has been vacant since 2009. It's been registered on the city's vacant structure registry since that time. Prior to that, it was rented to a fraternity here in town that left it in a state that was less than ideal. And the city has been working with the sorority to encourage re-tenanting of the building to try and protect it so that it does not deteriorate. They do have a local property management company that is looking after the property, and they are responsive. When they receive calls about damage to the building, they have gone and very quickly secured it. But a big part of the problem is simply that it's sitting vacant. And there has been damage from vandalism and trespassers. There's also been damage from exposure to the elements when it is not being heated and cooled in the way that it would be if there were people living in it, occupying it. There have been numerous broken windows and doors, and a lot of the windows and doors are now boarded up. There have been quite a few false fire alarms that have been reported to the Urbana Fire Department. They believe that that is in part because the fire alarm system is deteriorating. It's quite old. And the Building Safety Division does receive regular complaints from the neighborhood with regards to open and or broken windows, illegal parking, and the grass and landscaping not being mowed and maintained and trimmed. The exterior trim, the windows and doors are continuing to deteriorate without the proper maintenance and adequate surface protection that would be required to properly preserve the building. So the application states that the sorority house has significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. That's one of our criteria listed in our ordinance. Also, that it is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type inherently valuable for the study of a period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials while retaining a high degree of integrity. Another criteria is that it is a notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. And the final criteria that it states that the house meets is that it is identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its unique location or physical characteristics. So we'll go through the criteria in order. The first one, that it has significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. So this really has several parts, and the first is the importance of Greek houses to our community specifically and to our country, right? So that the Greek community really had a huge impact on university life and how it was conducted. So the first fraternities and sororities were in the 1800s, and this sorority house, when it was built in 1928, became one of the largest, or the largest concentration of Greek letter societies in the United States. So the sorority was founded in Farmville, Virginia, at the State Female Normal School in 1898. And the Illinois chapter opened in 1921 with 17 founding members. They originally were in a house located on Illinois Street and then moved to another house in Champaign. And then in 1926, they purchased this property and began what was eventually what we have today. So there's a wonderful history in the application form, and there's also further documentation in a history that's located, it was done for the university by a student that's located at the archives, and that is a history of the sorority. And that is available if you look on page 4 of your memo. There is a link of where you can find that online. And so for that criteria, city staff would recommend a finding that the sorority house does have significant value as part of the architectural, cultural, educational, and social heritage of the community due as an outstanding example of the role that Greek life has historically played on the University of Illinois campus, which is recognized as having the largest university Greek system of any American university. For the second criteria, that it be associated with an important person or event in national, state, or local history, the application does not claim that it is associated with an important person or event, so it does not qualify under that criteria B. The third criteria, that it is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type inherently valid for the study of a period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials, and which retains a high degree of integrity. It does qualify under that criteria, and the application does claim that, state that. So the house was, as I mentioned before, designed by Joseph Royer in the French eclectic architectural style. And some of the identifying features, so we can see here, not sure if you can see, it's not on the, if we could have the photograph showed on the television screen, thank you. So some of the identifying characteristics or features of the French eclectic style that are in this particular house include a tall, steeply pitched hipped roof, stucco wall cladding with decorative brick and half timbering. So the half timbering is over here, along here on the newer addition as well. The presence of a prominent round tower with a high conical roof containing the main entrance to the building. So here is the main entrance to the building. So there's a conical tower. And all of those are typical of the French eclectic style. So the sorority house has been recognized as being architecturally significant prior to this application. In 2011, it was included in the list of Urbana's 100 most significant buildings, which this commission determined. That list is on the city's website and does have some information about both the house and the sorority available on the city's website. In July of 1989, which I mentioned, it was included on the National Register of Historic Places multiple property documentation form for Greek letter societies, although it is not, as I mentioned, individually listed. And the sorority house was also identified in a 1974 architectural survey of Urbana-Champaign as being, and I quote, exceptionally significant and is proposed to receive local landmark status if and when a landmark program for the cities is begun. And that was by a graduate student by the name of Frank Heitzman in 1974, and he is in fact active in the preservation community in Illinois still today. He's an architect based out of Chicago. So that 1974 was before we had our historic preservation ordinance and before we were able to designate local landmarks. The second part of that criteria deals with the integrity of the building. So with this building, so these newer additions, which are explained in the packet, they were built in 1963. So often an addition can compromise the integrity of a structure if it's scale, if it's out of scale, if it's too big, if the style is jarring to or not respectful of the style of the original building. In this case, the additions are in scale with the original building, and they are sympathetic in style to the original building and don't really harm the integrity of the building. So the sorority house does appear to have a high degree of integrity, and the original building form is still visible, is still readable to the public as they walk by. The original massing still remains on the original part of the building. It has its original windows and doors, although now quite a few of the windows have been boarded up. The wrought iron balcony, the dormers, and the prominent chimney. The 1963 addition on the west side does not compromise the house's architectural integrity, as it does match the original materials and is compatible with the original structure in terms of massing and scale. Another point to mention is that the addition this year becomes 50 years old, and so could in fact be considered historic itself now. So city staff recommends a finding that the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of the French eclectic architectural style and is inherently valuable for the study of that style as well as for its craftsmanship, and that additionally the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house retains a high degree of integrity. The next criteria D in our ordinance, the notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. So this is, goes back to Joseph Royer, the architect who designed the house. And so as I mentioned before, he was the city's engineer and designed the county courthouse, Urbana High School, Leal Elementary School, the Urbana Free Library, many of the buildings in our downtown, many of the churches, and many of the residences scattered throughout the city. We do have an official arts and architecture district commemorating Royer's impact and significance to the community. And we also have been fortunate enough to have Bryan Adams' book, which documents Royer's work and impact on our community. And in your packet there is a quote from Bryan Adams' book. It's what he opens the book with, and he says that a traveler entering Urbana in the 1920s might well have been entering a city justifiably named Royerville. By the 1920s, much of the architectural character of downtown Urbana and much of the residential ring around the city had been determined by Urbana-born architect Joseph William Royer. So his impact on our community was huge. Without him, our city would look very different than what it does today. So city staff recommends a finding that the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house is a notable work of Joseph Royer, a master architect whose individual genius has greatly influenced Urbana and Central Illinois. The next criteria is that it be identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its unique location or physical characteristics. So if we go back to the location map in the packet. So here you can see this is the location of the sorority house. This is Lincoln Avenue and this is Vermont Avenue. Lincoln Avenue is not only the eastern edge of the University of Illinois, so that is the edge where the university meets the rest of our community, but it's also in a way a gateway into our community. So Lincoln Avenue extends to the north and goes out to the interstate, and many people enter our community from Lincoln Avenue, so it is a gateway welcoming people into the community, and it's certainly a gateway welcoming people to the University of Illinois campus. And the sorority house does sit on a corner lot, a prominent corner lot that is very noticeable. If we go back to the pictures, so Lincoln Street is over here. This is Vermont here. Sorry. So this is the side that is visible from Lincoln Avenue. So the part that is visible from Lincoln Avenue is the addition, but it is in keeping with the materials and in keeping with the scale and the style of the original part of the building, and it is definitely a very noticeable landmark in our community. So the physical characteristics on the main facade, primarily the tall, steeply pitched hipped roof, the stucco wall cladding with decorative brick and half timbering, and the prominent round tower with the high conical roof, which contains the main entrance to the building, are dramatic and unique. These characteristics indicate the French eclectic architectural style, which is representative of the revival styles that Joseph Royer tended to use in his designs. Given these unique physical characteristics, the sorority house is certainly identifiable as an established and familiar feature in the community. And in terms of unique location, So generally, being on a corner is not enough to meet that criteria, but in this case, it is on Lincoln Avenue, which is a gateway to the university and to our community, and so therefore does become more of a unique location. So in that criteria, city staff recommends a finding that the sorority house is identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its uniquely prominent and picturesque roofline, rich use of materials and architectural details indicative of the French eclectic architectural style, and visibility from Lincoln Avenue, an arterial roadway which defines the eastern edge of campus. And the last two criteria, F, that it be a utilitarian structure, it does not meet that, and G, that it have relevance in history or prehistory, so archaeology, it also does not meet that criteria. So in your memo, there is a recommended summary of findings. That's on pages 6 and 7. And then your options this evening are laid out. Unless you were to have written consent to the or support of the application from the property owner, which we know that we do not have the property owners here this evening and has given you a letter indicating their objection to this. So your decision this evening is a recommendation to the Urbana City Council, and they would make the final determination. So the staff recommendation, based on the application and analysis, is that the commission find that the landmark nomination for 1404 South Lincoln Avenue conforms with criteria A, C, D, and E in section 12-5C of the Urbana zoning ordinance, and recommend approval of the application with the summary of findings recommended in this memorandum. If you wanted to change any of the recommended findings, that's fine, but you do need to list findings in your recommendation. And I will just go through quickly the communications that we have received. First of all, we did receive this evening from the sorority, the Zeta Tau Alpha fraternities, objection to the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority house nomination for historic landmark status. Each of you have a copy. There were some extra copies at the back. So that was submitted to you this evening, and will also be, I know that they will be submitting documentation to the city clerk as part of a valid protest against the application. But they are here this evening, and I'm sure that they will explain what's in their letter and what they are planning to do at the city council level. The other communications that we've received, we have quite a few in support. We do have one from Chris Enck, who is an architect in Chicago, and he is writing in support. He has done a lot of work for the Society for the Preservation of Greek housing. It's a society, and he was hoping to be here to speak with you this evening. He was not able to make it at the last minute, so he has sent a letter instead. We also have another letter in support from a graduate of the Master of Architecture program here in 2007, and he is also writing in support. Both of them have some particular, they have worked on other Greek housing projects. And then we do have a letter in support from the Preservation and Conservation Association of Champaign County, PACA, has written in support, and they have at least one person here this evening who will speak to you, but this is from the executive director saying that the association does support this application. And then we have, I'll just read through the names because we do have a lot of them, people who were not able to be here this evening but wanted to show you their support. Deborah Katz Downey of 209 West Delaware, Esther Patt of 706 South Kohler Avenue, Gail Walden, Tanya Story of 807 South Birch Street, Sarah Projansky and Kent Ono, 803 West Michigan Avenue, Chris Bertie, 411 West Nevada, Kate Hunter, 510 West Oregon Street, Sarah McAvoy, 805 West Michigan Avenue, Stanley Friedman, Stuart Martin of 302 West Washington Street. Peggy Patton, 609 West Indiana. Anthony and Mary Eng, 803 West Indiana. And that is it. So I would be happy to answer any questions. I would also direct you to, in your packet, I believe immediately after the application form, is a letter from the applicant, Brianna Kraft, who is unable to be here this evening. And she does explain why she's not able to be here. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm sure there are many other people who would like to speak on this evening.
Thank you. At this time, it's usually time for the petitioner to speak and present evidence. Ms. Kraft is not here, so the owner or the owner's representative will have an opportunity to ask questions of the staff if you have any clarifying questions on the application. I don't know. Since there are none, we're going to, at this time, proponents of the request who have relevant information to present to the commission may speak. It looks like there's a lot of you. So in the interest of time and fairness, let's kind of limit this unless you have new information. And when you come up to speak, if you could state your name and your address and please enter it on the paper there, that would be great. Should we start with the first row? Whoever would like to speak? Okay.
My name's Brian Adams. I live at 410 West Elm Street in Urbana. I support this nomination, and I urge you to support the nomination too. I'm always glad when a building in Urbana is... I'm always glad when a building in Urbana is nominated for landmark status, and especially if it's a Royer building. I think that the nomination is very well written and very well detailed and documented, so I think it makes a very good case for a local landmark. And that's about it. Thank you.
Do you have in the sorority's objection, they talk about questioning about whether Royer himself was the architect for this. Do you have anything that you uncovered or saw that makes you think that Joseph Royer was the architect instead of just his firm?
Aside from the plans that recently were found, the blueprints, but they have the firm's name on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know any details
Okay.
about that.
All right.
Thank you. Next.
Can't do two things at the same time anymore. I'm Richard Cahill. I live at 307 South Orchard. I'm glad to see a few friendly faces still on the commission. I've served on this commission for a number of years. I'm not officially representing PACA, but I'm a past president of PACA, and lately I've been getting involved again with the organization. To me, this is a very easy call. Unfortunately, if you drive up and down Lincoln Avenue, I think you don't see the best side of this house. You really have to turn east and really see the tremendous facade on the north side of the street. It's a truly amazing building. Brian alluded to blueprints. Well, a couple years ago when they were tearing down the famous ice house over there along the railroad tracks in Champaign, we came across all these architectural plans, and it was Smith Architects, but Royer was the original partner. Smith eventually went off on his own. So these were blueprints in progress for that building, and since Smith ended up with them, I'm sure it was done with that office. And they really are incredible blueprints. They suffered from years of damage from a lot of water, and we pulled out all the Royer plans, and now they're at the U of I archives. I think the nomination is typical of some of the students that Alice has come up with. It's very thorough, very well researched. I can't see how you could question any of the criteria. Truly, we all know about Royer. The importance of the Greek houses, both in Champaign-Urbana. I mean, they're really lying up and down Lincoln Ave in particular. They're really, stunning buildings. It's a shame that once again you're going to have to go rule over owner objection. I encourage all the audience that are here tonight. This is an easy group to talk to, the commission. But if you're really concerned about this issue, you need to let your council people know. And you really need to go to the council meeting, because the council loves to see an audience, and they need to see the audience, and they need to hear you at that meeting, because to go over an objection becomes a little bit more complicated. So I encourage you to pass this and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, it is. Are there any additional proponents that would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Louise Cooney. I live at 801 West Indiana. My home was designated local landmark at the January meeting. For this property, I'd just like to say that my husband and I bought our home, which is less than a block from Lincoln, with the understanding that the city of Urbana took preservation seriously. As a matter of fact, we were concerned enough about it to do some research and find the Lincoln-Busey corridor plan online, and of course the property in question and the second property on the agenda tonight are both in that corridor. So I would just ask you to, if you can, try to fulfill what we consider to be a significant document, to try to fulfill the promise of that document and take the preservation of the homes and the buildings, particularly in the Lincoln-Busey corridor, very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other proponents that would like to speak at this time? Would the owner or the owner's representative have any questions? At this time, I'll open it up to opponents of the request, and you may present relevant evidence. Are there any opponents? Yeah.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Colleen Ramey, and I'm with the law firm of Meyer Capel. I'm here with Ann Tamulitis, who is director of the Board of Housing of the Fraternity Housing Corporation, the owner of the property. For the record, the owner would like to state their objection to this application for 3 primary reasons. First, we contend that the application itself is insufficient. Second, the foreseeable costs of the designation would put this particular designation at odds with the stated goals of historic landmark designation in general. And finally, it is our position that it is unwise from a policy perspective to grant these types of applications when the applicant is not in attendance and from our understanding not even continuing to reside in Urbana over the objection of the owner. First, I'll start with why the application, in our view, is insufficient. First, and in general, the application relies on several unsupported allegations. While the application does cite to some documentation, it does not. The documentation is not sufficient. Also, though the city staff did provide an overview and supplement the application, the applicant has not provided any additional evidence at this hearing. I'm going to quickly review the 4 criteria and our position on each of those criteria. First, the application speaks to the fact that this building is representative of the French eclectic architecture. And under this criterion, what is important to note is that the building must retain a high degree of integrity. As we heard, the building itself has had at least 4 significant additions, and the application highlights various changes and differences between the original structure and the additions, including different numbers of levels of the structure, varying heights. Part of it has 2.5 stories, part of it has 3. And the mere assertion that the 1963 addition has gained significance in its own right in the application is simply stated and not supported by any additional documentation. While the city staff has provided some indication that the building as a whole may have come to gain some significance, it has first, it was not in the application, and second, it does not pertain specifically to the 1963 addition. Further, the modifications at the various stages to the property suggest that there has been a hybrid of various styles, and instead of one coherent French eclectic planned style. Second, I would direct your attention to our objection, the Exhibit A. Exhibit A to our objection is a Daily Illini article published in 1928, the year that the property at issue was constructed, wherein, and I think it's the second sentence of the article mentions that Mr. Smith of Joseph Royer's firm designed the building. This is the only evidence that we have uncovered of the actual architect above and beyond just the firm. The second criteria highlighted by the application speaks of an individual genius of a renowned architect. And as we've heard, a lot of the focus this evening and in the application is on Mr. Royer. Now, we have not heard, however, other than the assertions to the fact, any actual evidence that Joseph Royer was the designer and not Mr. Smith. Also, and significantly, even if this was designed by Mr. Royer, the application highlights the various styles that Mr. Royer designed in, and it would be a stretch to say that this is particularly a particularly good example of a signature style, given that Royer designed in so many different styles. So the application fails to clarify why this property in particular is notable as being designed by Mr. Royer, if it even was. And to that point, I would just like to mention that the castle-like appearance of the property was specifically asked for by Zeta Tau Alpha. The castle is significant in the Zeta Tau Alpha sorority lore. Castles appear in many of their imagery in the sorority, basically what the sorority stands for and discusses. I'm sure Ms. Tamulitis could expand on that if you would desire. But the point being that the castle architecture is really specific to the particular owners here and not necessarily representative of a certain style of the architect. The third criterion I'd like to touch on is the historical significance. As we heard Ms. Bird present and as stated in the application, the Zeta Tau Alpha history has been cited for the significance of the house, and city staff has recommended a finding that the house has significant value as part of the architectural, cultural, educational, and social heritage of the community, because, in particular, it's an outstanding example of the role that Greek life has historically played on the University of Illinois campus. However, I would submit to you that there has, other than being associated with one particular sorority, there has not been any particular evidence that this house, among all of the other Greek houses, is noteworthy for that reason. I would argue that the same statement could be made of all of the Greek houses, and so I don't know if it's the Commission's policy to recognize all of the Greek houses in Urbana as historic landmarks, but we would ask, I suppose, for some clarification on that point. Also, to that point, even if the character of the house and the historical significance of it being related to the Greek system is an important, is something that the Commission wishes to preserve, I would argue that the best way to ensure this is to help Zeta Tau Alpha retain ownership of this house, which it is likely that this designation would hamper. It would hamper the ability of the organization to recolonize on the University of Illinois in this particular house. I'll discuss that a little bit more in a minute. Finally, the identifiable qualities of the house, I just wanted to reiterate what we heard earlier from Mr. Adams. Though this house is on the Lincoln thoroughfare, Mr. Adams did note that the most impressive portions of the house are not even visible from Lincoln Avenue, which was cited by Ms. Bird as a significant reason to designate this as a particularly identifiable landmark. Even if the application itself were sufficient and the evidence sufficiently strong, I would just like to draw your attention to the foreseeable costs that a historic landmark designation would impose on the owner. The Zeta Tau Alpha has been pursuing the option of reopening on campus. However, their house needs significant work to be habitable by students. It needs replacement and or repair of the roof, and it needs a replacement and repair of the windows, most significantly, in addition to the several other cosmetic and structural deficiencies that have been noted earlier. The roof is prone to leaks. It has there are 4 different materials at a minimum that have been used on various portions of the roof, and while the sorority has been patching them when leaks have sprung, it is inevitable that the roof will need at some point to be completely replaced. In one of those efforts to patch leak, the sorority had to look for replacement tiles to match the original slate tiles that are on the roof, and were told by a contractor that they could not be found in any significant quantity, and therefore having significant restrictions on the materials that would be possible to use on this kind of maintenance would pose a significant burden on the owner. That being said, Zeta Tau Alpha takes pride in the house and has incentives to maintain the building. There are significant sentimental ties to the original character and architecture, especially given the castle lore in the sorority. But at the same time, this is a living, breathing organization. They must be able to modernize to account for the changing needs and desires of the membership. These restrictions that would be placed by a historic landmark designation would make it harder and more expensive and a longer process to make the necessary changes to make the building habitable and to modernize it in such a way that it would be attractive for students to live in. Because of the way that this Greek system operates, all of the sororities are competing for members, and such restrictions, when not all of the other sorority houses need to deal with similar restrictions, would put Zeta Tau Alpha at a disadvantage in their efforts to recolonize the University of Illinois. It is also uncertain that the organization will be able to support the additional cost involved in the longer process of getting approval from the Historic Preservation Commission to make such improvements. And if that is the case, they would have to consider selling the building. If the building, if they are forced to sell, the market value of the property will necessarily be depressed because the buyer pool will be restricted, as a house that is not readily available to be modernized to suit the needs of the owners will necessarily carry less market value. Finally, from a policy perspective, this application should be recommended to be denied. This application, I understand, is an educational tool, and while Zeta Tau Alpha does support the educational mission of the university and the architecture school, the failure of the applicant to appear at the hearing and to pursue this application should be heavily weighed against this application. The owner has had no opportunity to cross-examine the applicant or to challenge some of her assertions, since she is not present, and therefore, and additionally, the petition requires the expenditure of time and money by both the owner and the city to consider, and it's only equitable and fair that the petitioner should similarly expend time and energy or money on defending her application. Therefore, we do request that the Commission recommend that the application be denied, given the significant burden it would pose for the owner and the policy of these particular types of applications. And also, it is our position that the application in itself was simply insufficient, as not supported by concrete evidence. I'll now turn the microphone over to Ms. Tamulitis if she has any additional anything additional to share, or if you have any questions for either me or her.
Good evening. I just wanted to mention, not only do I have the honor of serving Zeta Tau Alpha on the Fraternity Housing Corporation, I'm an alumna of Alpha Kappa, of Zeta Tau Alpha chapter, which was our chapter at the University of Illinois, and I did live in the house for 2 years. So it is very near and dear to my heart for reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with who built it, or how many different architects may have worked on it. In 1992, I was the membership chairman for Zeta Tau Alpha, and it was a time in which we were struggling for membership. And one of the reasons was that women simply did not want to live in the house because it was not competitive with what they could find elsewhere on campus in terms of housing. There were apartments available, and their other sororities were nicer than ours were. And I believe that that contributed a large part to the decline of the chapter, which eventually closed shortly after I graduated. It's the mission of the Fraternity Housing Corporation to provide safe, secure, and competitive housing for our chapters. And on this campus, that would certainly require us to undergo some renovations to the current property. As we mentioned, the roof is obviously something that we need to give attention to on a regular basis due to the age of it, and I would anticipate that it would need to be replaced. And as someone who lived in the house, I can certainly attest to the fact that the windows don't insulate very well in the winter. It gets pretty chilly. And in addition, they're quite old and don't close well, don't keep out the wind and the rain very well. So it is a constant effort to maintain the house. Also, I just wanted to note the reason that the windows are boarded up is not because of damage, but because it was done so at the request of the city of Urbana, because it is a vacant property. They had requested that we board up all of the accessible windows on the first floor and any that may be accessible from the second floor by climbing up onto a one-story portion of the house. If you've seen the house, and I'm sure that you've driven by, you'll notice that some of the areas are not looking their best, but we do try to comply with all of the city's requirements. We do mow once a week during the summer, twice per summer. We have the landscaping trimmed back significantly. We have regular cleanup of any trash that may be left in the yard, and of course the property manager visits on a regular basis to inspect the property both inside and out and address any concerns. I've not heard any reports of any complaints about the appearance being filed with the city. Certainly if I had, we would have addressed them. We did plan to do some maintenance on the exterior of the building this summer, and also some upgrading to the fire alarm system, but because of the need to retain legal counsel to advise us in this matter, we've had to put that on hold because we have a limited amount of money allocated for the maintenance of each of our properties, and we felt like this was something that we really needed to get advice on for our protection and for the future of the property. Any questions?
The applicant not being here and them having an opportunity to question that, I think it should be noted in the minutes. Has that ever happened before? Is there?
Not Can you hear me? Too loud? Not loud enough? Not since I've been here. I would imagine it has happened. We've had situations where applicants have not been here when we've considered certificates of appropriateness. But as I recall, they were relatively small things, and someone else was here to answer questions. We do have, in terms of cross-examining anything in the application, we do have Alice Novak is here. She's the chair of this body, and she was the professor who oversaw these students that wrote, the student that wrote this application. And if there are technical questions that you do have about the application, she may be able to address them.
I mean, it seems like a lot of the application was an emphasis on Mr. Royer, and a lot of the letters of support actually are emphasizing Mr. Royer's contribution in the significance of the house, and if in fact it was designed by Mr. Smith. Instead, I'm just wondering, you know, how that factors into things.
I would also just like to note for the record that there will be, in addition to the other upgrades that are required, some of the damage to the property that Ms. Bird mentioned, with it not being adequately heated and cooled as it would be if it were in use. The house doesn't have air conditioning installed in any fashion, so that would be something that would also need to be addressed, as well as the operation of the windows. Not only are they old and not necessarily functioning as well as they could be, but many of the windows open outwards and do not allow for a screen to be placed. And in the past, the owner has expressed their concern that this could be actually a safety issue for any residents of the property, in terms of if you go to close one of those windows, if it's open widely, it poses the risk that an individual could fall from the open window. So there are several things that the sorority has identified as important to address, and that would be required work to make the house livable again. That would need, if this designation were to be granted, it would require several interactions to get certificates of appropriateness for many of the different repairs that need to be made to the house.
Are there any questions?
I have a couple of questions. Hi, first of all, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. A couple of things you've discussed that would need to be repaired: the roof, the windows. Those would need to be repaired whether or not we landmark this building, correct? If you're looking to recolonize here in Urbana and you'd like to have students move back in, you'd need to take that on whether or not the building is landmarked. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And so I guess I fail to understand that point of, if we landmark this, it would cost somehow the sorority, the fraternity, housing, additional funds on top of what you're saying you'd like to do anyway in repopulating or recolonizing this property. So I'd just like to hear, why would landmarking the building make this a more exorbitant cost than it would be whether or not we landmarked it?
We actually have another property of a similar age that does have landmark status, and have tried to do some of the renovations that we've talked about, and have run into trouble with the Historic Commission in the city that it's located, because they will not accept any commercially available products, but would rather us commission custom replacement windows, for example. We're not able to replace the windows at that property because it's prohibitively expensive to meet the requirements of the Historic Commission in that city.
So the windows need to be replaced because they're drafty, because they open outwards?
They're in poor condition.
Okay, and so I know that there are companies that make inside storm windows that could cut down the draft coming in and could prevent anyone from falling out the window if it were opened. So there may be ways that you can meet the criteria of the exterior of the building if it were landmarked, but still be cost-effective and be able to do the repairs that you'd like to do in order to get people back into the house. I mean, I'm sure we'd all like to see, that house populated again. So I think there may be ways that you could do the repairs that are required that may not be more cost prohibitive than you think they might be. So it's just something to entertain.
I understand. I'm just basing this on our experience with another property where it hasn't been possible.
The other factor to consider is the additional cost of the administrative process of filing an application or for a certificate of appropriateness, and the back and forth between the owner and the city, and the disadvantage that would. I mean, that's going to take more time than just going about and replacing your own windows, and that's an added burden to the property owner that the other sororities and fraternities don't necessarily have, and it's another expense for the housing corporation that should be taken into consideration.
The certificate of appropriateness doesn't cost anything per se. There's no fee associated with that. I agree that there would be some time that would need to be spent, but sometimes things can also be administratively approved. You wouldn't actually have to come. You just need to submit an application, and there may be some things that could just be approved administratively without a hearing per se.
There are, though, required notices that have to be placed in the local newspaper, and there are fees associated with that, though, correct?
Thanks, Rebecca.
We actually, the city pays for the notices that are put in the paper. The city does all of the noticing for certificates of appropriateness. And as Gina was alluding to, we do have in our ordinance, we have a chart that details all of the different types of projects that you would do on the exterior of a house, and it lists a different level of review. So there are projects that are exempt, and those are projects that are generally kind of general maintenance and repair. Then projects that involve like a minor change, and those can be reviewed administratively. And then projects which involve an actual change or a larger modification does have to come to the board. But there are no fees. You don't pay the application fee, and we do pay the legal noticing fees. And we also have an incentive for our landmark properties. We do waive all building permit fees, so that includes building permits, mechanical permits, plumbing, electrical, fence, all permits that come. They still need to be applied for and issued, but we do waive the fees for those. And I just calculated at one of our other properties that was landmarked, I think, 2 years ago, and I just calculated that they saved something like $3,000 in building permit fees.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Did you sign in? Okay, thanks. Are there any other opponents that would like to speak at this time?
Good evening. My name is Elsa Gunter. I live at 801 West Vermont Avenue, which is directly across the street from the building under discussion. And I would like to speak in opposition to this, basically because of the reasons that have been addressed so far. That is the fact that, and I assert that it is a fact from personal experience, that imposing the additional restrictions that giving it a historic designation will impose upon doing repairs to the building will continue to lengthen the period of time that the building remains abandoned, or perhaps it's vacant, I guess is the correct word for it, and that will cause the building to continue to be a nuisance in the neighborhood. The building right now is a nuisance for a number of reasons that were already cited, but I will also cite it because it's a place where drug deals go down. It's a place where regularly people come over from far and they go behind the building to do their business and go away again. And when they're dealing marijuana, they don't even bother necessarily to go behind the street, as my sons have testified. And the sooner this building is put back into useful use, the better it will be for the neighborhood that's immediately adjacent to it. And by making it be the case that windows have to be custom made, they have to be custom fitted. Yes, you can get storm windows that are on the inside, but typically they have to be custom made, and that's very expensive, and I've been there and done that. Similarly, the tiles on the roof, many places on that roof need to be repaired. They've even had trees growing out of various places, like the chimney. By restricting the kinds of materials that can be used, you are reducing the likelihood that this will be dealt with in a timely fashion, and that's going to continue to have a negative impact on the neighbors who are immediately adjacent to that property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other opponents that would like to speak at this time? Are there any others that have, they would like to speak, they don't have an opinion one way or the other, that would like to make a comment?
Hello, my name is Brian Deers. I live at 807 West Vermont, which is directly across from the house. I'm speaking in this part of the session because I'm torn as to whether or not it should have historic preservation distinction or not. We bought the house across the street from it because my wife and I truly love old historic houses. Our house is actually mentioned in one of the application for the other house. On the other hand, our concern is that if the house is given this historic designation, what's going to happen to the future of it? As the owners have spoken, it could add additional burden on them in order to continue to maintain the house, in order to get it reestablished with residents. We're concerned that if the house continues to be vacant, it's just going to become more and more will have worse and worse, become in worse and worse condition, and will continue to deteriorate, and it will become to the point where no one will ever want to live in it again. And eventually, probably somebody's going to just start squatting in it, and there'll be an arson event in it, and the house will probably burn down. So we'd really like for something to happen so that people can live in the house again. You know, whether the sorority can live in it or if they can have another use for it, that would be great. But we would just be concerned about having this historic designation slow this process down.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Carolyn Colston. I live at 710 West Indiana Avenue. And I just want to point out, with regard to the expense that's being claimed by the owners, that at this point there is no restriction on the owner in any way. And for many years this property has remained vacant, despite the fact that they could have renovated in any way they chose to. and they have not. Furthermore, they're not making any promise to this body or to the public that they intend to maintain the property if the designation is not granted. So I wonder whether they're hoping to have it fall into dilapidation and tear it down. It's a very valuable location and could be used for many other purposes were it torn down. And that would be a very big shame, in my opinion. It's a historic district. The residents of the area adore the historic nature of the homes and buildings in that area, and other kinds of structures would certainly diminish their value, their homes' values. So I hope you take that into consideration. Thank you.
Are there any other additional comments? Staff, do you have any clarifications in response to this? Any new evidence that's been presented?
I could actually make, oh, I'm sorry. Sure.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
I just wanted to explain a little further, I guess, why the property has continued to be vacant. When our chapter closed back in the mid-90s, we decided to hold on to the house in the hopes that it would be a quick return, within 5 years. And so the decision was made to lease to a fraternity. Unfortunately, it wasn't a quick return. We continued the leasing arrangement for approximately 15 years until we determined that the house actually was undergoing more damage due to the tenant than it would if it was standing vacant. Unfortunately, the ball is not in our court as far as returning to the University of Illinois. We have to wait for an invitation from the University of Illinois Panhellenic, and that is something that we are hoping to hear in the near future, but it's not under our control. As I mentioned before, we've tried to do everything that the city has asked of us in terms of maintaining the property. We do shovel snow in the winter. We mow the lawn in the summer, cut back the landscaping twice a summer, have a property manager visit on a regular basis to address maintenance issues. We certainly do not want the house to fall into disrepair, because it is our goal to have our women live there again. And we want to go beyond having it be habitable. We want it to be a place that women will want to live. They will want to join our organization and live in that house. Back in 1992, I wrote a little paragraph for the recruitment guide that was given out to potential new members, and in it I called our house the jewel in the ZTA crown. Admittedly, at the time, I was bluffing a little. It really wasn't that great, but we wanted it to be. And I have a hope for the future that it really will be the jewel in the ZTA crown. I think that we can do it if we're given the opportunity. And it certainly is not going to be easy, and it certainly will not be inexpensive by any means, whether it is a landmark or not. But just based on our experience, it's a lot more complicated when it is a landmark.
Can you clarify the invitation by the U of I to reinstate the sorority? I don't understand how that system works.
Well, the way the Panhellenic system works is they have to decide if their potential new member interest justifies adding another group, and if they feel that it does, then they choose to open for extension. And Currently, they have offered the opportunity to two sororities that closed in the recent past. One of them will be attempting recolonization this fall, and I'm not sure if the second one is still interested in recolonizing or not because they sold their house that they had in Champaign. So I'm not sure if there's still interest from them in returning.
So are there a certain number, and that you have to wait until another sorority has?
Well, it's based on the number of women
Total.
who register for recruitment.
Okay.
And if they feel that the numbers of women registering are steady or increasing, and the chapter size of the current groups is getting too large, then they will decide to open for extension and invite another group to colonize.
Thank you.
I did just have one point of clarification of something that Carolyn Colston, I believe it was, said. So the property is zoned R7, University Residential, which is a quite narrow zoning category. A church is allowed as, I believe, a special use in it. Its main use is for dormitories or boarding houses, rooming houses, which is what sororities and fraternities fall under that categorization. And there aren't really any other uses that would be allowed on that property without a rezoning. And based on recent rezoning attempts in the West Urbana neighborhood, particularly that close to Lincoln Avenue, I think a rezoning would be unlikely to be approved. So it would not really, she had said that that's valuable property. You could do a lot of different things with it. You really couldn't. An apartment building would not be allowed on that, in that zoning district. And there are a couple of, there is a set of design guidelines that does apply currently to that property, the Lincoln Busey design guidelines. And so any new construction, demolition is not reviewed, but new construction is. And so if there were anything new to be built on that lot, it would have to meet the Lincoln Busey design guidelines.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Well, the applicant's not here. The staff or the owner? Okay. I now close the public input for the public hearing, and it's now time for the commission to discuss. Commissioners?
I guess I'd like to start with the criteria D and how much we may or may not know about Royer's participation in the design of the building. And I note the Daily Illini article that was mentioned by the opponents. And so I guess I'd just like to sort of ask everyone that question. You know, Tiffany did not make very many Tiffany windows, and Cholula really doesn't make very much glass. And so at least from an artistic rendering, you know, we live in a kind of a big business mass-produced culture where I don't necessarily expect that Royer would have to be drawing literally on blueprints in order to exert his influence inside his own firm about the way that the building is being designed and its special attributes. So that doesn't bother me, but I'm looking for comment as to whether it bothers anybody else or what they think about it.
Well, I work for a small architecture firm, and we all, the benefit of a small architecture firm is that everybody gets to work on the projects. So usually there is a project architect and they take the lead, but typically we all work on the projects. Very rarely do they go out and they are limited to only, one of our architects. Usually there's more than that. I'm not familiar with the size of Royer's firms at that time, but I would think that in all likelihood that probably could have been the case, that everybody worked on it. The nice thing about a small firm is everybody puts their heads together and they work on the design and kind of throw out ideas. It's a real creative environment, I think. That's my experience.
On the same subject, I think it's an interesting fact that the Daily Illini mentioned a name I'd never heard of as being the architect for it, but the fact that he was with Royer's firm lends some strength to a lot of strength to the Royer association with this building. And I wish we had a little more information other than one Daily Illini article, one way or the other, or more mentioned somewhere, but I certainly didn't do any investigation on this, and I'm not sure there's much to be found out about it, that maybe something else will turn up, but I'm not terribly concerned that another architect in the same firm's name is more associated with this than Royer seems to be. So that's what I have to say.
Other comments? Any of the other criteria?
Well, on E, just the physical characteristics. I was in a fraternity when I was in school, and my aunt was a member of this. I think she was a member of this sorority, so I was aware of it. ZTAs, and I knew girls. But anyway, I'd been to the house. I'd been in the house, and I've always thought it was a stunning house. And if it were my fraternity that were up for nomination, I think I'd be. I think it's still a cool house, and I think it would be. I'd feel good about it. And anyway, I think this house has some amazing physical characteristics that can't be denied, and it does fit into a style and is a good example of that style. And I think that it's a strong argument under E.
I guess I'll just keep on kind of going through these from the top. I was pretty convinced about the cultural integrity or the heritage value. This is criteria A, in terms of its contribution to early campus housing and the impact of the Greek letter communities. But even more so after the dialogue from the opponents, the fact that ZTA actually commissioned a building of a specific type that evokes iconography in their own discipline, or however you want to describe Greek life, and that this community, through one of its leading architects, completed and finished that design, even links my appreciation and my certainty of the confirmation to criteria A more than it did before.
In the application, Ms. Kraft called it picturesque, and I do think that it is, I think it has some great examples of the French eclectic architectural style, the round tower. I can go over them again. The round tower with the conical roof and the tall, steeply pitched roof. The chimneys, the brickwork is absolutely beautiful on it. It is just lovely. The stucco with the half timbering, the casement windows, the upper casement windows they still look really wonderful, and the groupings of them. To me, the building addition, the 1963 building addition, I do think it is massive, but I do think it works. I do think they through materials and the roof line and tying in the horizontal banding of the materials, I think they did a pretty good job. I don't know what's housed in that addition, but in 1963, I think they did a pretty good job. I think it's a beautiful house. I think you're very lucky. Anyway.
Just, I've known the house for a long time, but when I really looked at it today, and those, like you mentioned, the chimneys, oh my gosh, I was scared by the chimneys. I think they're so massive and so bulky and amazing and tall, and the bricks sticking out. And anyway, those are amazing chimneys. And if you looked from the roof, I guess maybe it'd be a different story, but the whole thing, the brick parts, it looks solid. And anyway, I hope it's as solid as it looked to me.
Any more comments on any of the other criteria? We've gone over A, C, D, and E. Sorry. We've touched on all the criteria. Do you have any comments on?
I guess I think that the building meets the criteria that are in the application. I think it's a great example of architecture and something that we should all be proud of as a city and as the sorority fraternity. I was taken by it when I went by it a couple weeks ago when I first found out we were going to be, looking at this nomination. And I think it's a gorgeous house.
Well, I guess I'm ready to try to make a motion. Before I do that, I want to speak a little bit to the opponents. As you probably get a sense from the dialogue that's up here, no one has said cost. We kind of get to be a group of people who've tried to educate ourselves a lot about our community, what historical architecture looks like and means to us, and we apply our experience to that. I think, or at least I hope, that you'll find, should this designation go through, that the city and its staff can be very friendly in the context of some of the specific repair problems that you've noted. I've sat through a lot of certificate of appropriateness hearings in this body, and certainly we recognize that if materials are not available, you can't replace them. We'll look for alternatives to replacement, but I don't think we've ever drawn a line that's going to put you in a real hole. So, having said that, I want to make a motion that in case number HP 2013 L01, the Historic Preservation Commission find that the application received April 8, 2013 for 1404 South Lincoln Avenue, the Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House, conforms with criteria A, C, D, and E of Section 12-5.c of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance as a local historic landmark. Specifically, we find that the Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House A is integral to the cultural characteristics of the community due to its being an outstanding example of early campus housing and of the impact of the Greek letter communities at the University of Illinois. C, it is highly representative of the French eclectic architectural style and valuable for its study, as well as retaining a high degree of integrity. In addition, it is a notable work of master architect Joseph Royer. And finally, E is a prominent feature of the community owing to its many unique features and visibility from the University of Illinois campus and Lincoln Avenue. That's the end.
Do I have a second?
I would second that well-crafted motion.
It has been moved and seconded. And do we need to reread that? No? Okay. Okay. And do we have discussion of the motion? Are you ready to vote on the motion? Yeah. Okay. If there's no discussion, let's have a roll call vote.
Mr. Dossett?
Yes.
Mr. Seiler?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Stoltz?
Yes.
And Ms. Paluso?
Yes.
The motion passes. We will now close the public hearing. And I believe we'll take just a little break. Just a
I'll just, so this will be forwarded to the City Council, not the upcoming Monday, but the following Monday, which I believe the date, if anyone has a calendar on them, the 17th? June 17th, thank you. And that's a City Council meeting at 7 p.m.
I'd like to open public hearing, case number HP-2013-L-02, an application to designate 1207 South Busey Avenue, the Reed Sutton House, as a local historic landmark. Elisa Larini as the applicant. Should I go over the procedure of the meeting again? Yeah. Okay. If there's anybody here that would like me to go over the procedure again, I will. Just let me know. Okay, everyone's familiar with that. Staff, would you like to summarize the case, please?
My name's Robert Myers, planning manager with the City of Urbana, and I'll be making a staff presentation tonight on this application. Again, for the record, is case number 2013-L02. The property is located at 1207 South Busey Avenue, and in the application is referred to as the Reed Sutton House. So if it's okay with you, I may be referring it to that name during the presentation. It's currently owned by the Twin City Bible Church, and I would like to make a short presentation about the application and the property. Maybe first, if we could just have a look around the building, and then I would like to talk about maybe a little bit of its history and the application and the criteria. But this is the house, and I apologize, but I don't know if on your screen or not, my laptop, the picture is a little elongated, but it looks like the correct proportions up on that screen. Does it look okay on yours? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does look okay. Good. Good. This is the house in question, 1207 South Busey Avenue. It's obviously it's a stone-clad home. I assume it's clad and not load-bearing. but built about 1940, and we'll be talking about that more in just a few moments. This is the corner of the building. Actually, when you drive north on Busey Avenue, this is the view that you see. You see on the corner what I would characterize as a screened-in porch, and then looking down Michigan Avenue, this is the view that you see looking down the sidewalk. Again, the screened-in porch, a closer view of that. And then looking north on Busey Avenue, what I want to do is give a little bit of the context of the property. And then across the street, here you see the home across the street. Again, the context. And this is really the front view of the home that you see when you drive by, is the, you might call it the predominant facade. I think one of the interesting things about the home is it has a attached garage that's part of the facade. You know, this is designed in 1939, built around 1940. And in my thinking, a lot of homes at that time, either the garage was turned around to the side, or it was detached and it was set back, or sometimes it was, you'd enter from the rear or something like that. But this is interesting because the garage is actually part of the, you know, it's even with the front facade, part of the facade. It doesn't appear to have been designed as an afterthought. It appears to be designed along with the home, which again I think is an interesting part of the property. Again, this is looking further north in that same block, looking, I guess that would be northwest. In fact, this home is now a local landmark next door to it, which was just designated recently by with the application of the owner. And again, looking kind of backwards towards the corner of the house. Those are the photos that give you an idea of the house. Now, a little bit about its background. I understand from the application that there are blueprints that date the design to November 1939, so we're guessing it must have been built about 1940. And it has elements of the Tudor Revival, English Revival architectural style, but it's not a, I wouldn't say that it displays all the character defining features of this architectural style. It's certainly more restrained. For one thing, it was designed in 1939. As you probably remember from history, that was the Depression, and a lot of the designs were more keeping in mind in terms of financial considerations. Now, the windows on the second floor, as I've just learned, have been replaced, but the original, you can see, this is a photo apparently provided by the daughter of one of the former owners, and you'll see that the original windows had these three paired windows, and I can pass this photo around for people if they'd like to take a look at it. Now, a lot of times when you think of Tudor or English Revival styles, you think of steeply pitched roofs. A lot of times they're very prominent. That's what I think of. I think of slate, sometimes clay tile, very rarely thatched. You think of elaborate chimneys, side gable roofs, decorative half-timbered wall treatment. Those things, this is not one of those homes. This apparently is a subtype within that architectural style that's all stone on the outside. In fact, this is Joliet limestone, and there's a report, I think, that's been, you've seen referenced, that's kind of a study on Joliet limestone, use of Joliet limestone in Illinois. It's kind of an interesting report. Now, during the home's first 69 years, there was two families that lived here, which I find interesting. So there were two families that were strongly associated with this home. It didn't go through lots of different hands and lots of different people. It was more stable than that. First, the owners were Frank and Helen Reed. They lived in the house from 1940 to 1964. Frank Reed was the head chemist at Illinois Geological Survey and he was a fellow of the American Association of Science in Chemistry. The second owners were the Sutton family, Robert and Elizabeth Sutton. Robert Sutton was a history professor, in fact, one time head of the history department at the University of Illinois, and was director of the Illinois Historic Survey. Those are both surveys. Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. University of Illinois History Program is a really, when he retired, I think it was in the early 1980s, he reported that over the years, the University of Illinois History Program has graduated something like 400 PhDs in history. So, I mean, it's a major program at the University of Illinois. In 2009, the house was sold to the Twin City Bible Church, and earlier this year, in city staff discussions with the owners, the Twin City Bible Church, they confirmed that they plan to continue using the Reed Sutton house as a residence. Those are their plans for the property. So I wanted to talk briefly about the criteria. The first one is, it's kind of a catch-all, but it has to do with heritage and history. And I should preface this by saying that I think I like to look at the criteria in terms of what stories are being told as part of its history and heritage and architecture, and how that story resonates or does not resonate with you and the public, and in terms of the criteria. So I can't tell anyone what's significant to them, but think about whether or not the story that a property tells in terms of its heritage and architecture, does that resonate with you as being significant and noteworthy, and et cetera. So the first criteria is significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. Again, that one has to do with heritage, and I guess the first phrase of that is significant value. Now, although the application doesn't really elaborate on or as to how this really meets the criteria, I think that the place of this building, in my view, and again, you're welcome to discuss or disagree, but my thinking is both property owners, Mr. Sutton and, well, Dr. Sutton and Dr. Reed, I'm sorry, Frank Reed, Dr. Reed and Dr. Sutton, both of them worked for surveys, and so how I would characterize this is there's a really robust survey system at the University of Illinois here, and what's that all about? The way I think of it as is the survey system is not about, it's not really about scholarship, although they do a lot of scholarly work. It's not really about education, although there's obviously that component. But I think of the survey system as identifying the resources of the state and then finding ways to use those resources for the betterment of the people of Illinois. So the Geological Survey is looking for the geological resources of the state, the Water Survey, the Archaeological Survey, the History Survey, et cetera. And so in my mind, this house fits into telling part of the story of the survey system. Having said that, I do ask myself, if I'm going to tell the story of the survey system, would I choose this building to tell that story? I think there's a connection there, and it's an interesting connection, but I don't know if that is part of the significant value of that story. But you all can decide for yourself and think about that. The second one is associated with an important person or event in national, state, or local history, and I would comment that event doesn't have to be something, one day in time. It could actually be something that's occurred over time, over a period of time that's significant. But again, it's associated with an important person or event. I would say that Frank Reed was chairman of the American Chemical Society Gas and Fuel Division. In my mind, one of his big contributions was that he was in 1945, he was one of 200 scientists and industrial experts sent to Germany to study German technical and war secrets on behalf of the Foreign Economic Administration. So again, it was kind of applying research, and in this case, the war secrets, on how to, scientific research on the betterment of society or for strategic importance for our own national strategic dominance in the world at the time. I think that's part of the story. Is Frank Reed an important person in an event in national, state, or local history? Think about that question for yourselves. And then Mr. Sutton, or Dr. Sutton, I should say, I mentioned previously he was head of the Illinois History Survey, head of the History Department, and was also a fellow in the American Association of, and he was also, let's see, the Associate Dean of the Liberal Arts and Sciences School. Again, I associate this house probably more in his role in the head of the Illinois History Survey, just because I think that is kind of a compelling story that two families are so closely associated for 69 years. Although I would say, you know, both of these men were well respected in their fields. But again, I guess you could go back to the question, were they important in national, state, or local history? And you can think about that yourself. The third criteria, I think, is architecturally related, representative of distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type inherently valuable for the study of a period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials, and which retains a high degree of integrity. So there's two parts to this. The first is its design, materials, construction. The second part is, does it retain integrity? Has it changed over time such that your ability to perceive its historic character is now inhibited, or does it retain sufficient integrity to be able to read that story in its place in history? I mentioned earlier about its place, I think, in the Tudor English Revival architectural style, and it's certainly not a high-style example. I think there's some characteristics of that style. You also might note the use of the Joliet limestone, which is essentially an indigenous material for this region. There's no local stone, but that's probably one of the closest local stone that's available. I would also say that I think it's interesting, but I don't know if it's significant or not, but I also think it's interesting that you have a garage on the front facade that seems to be part of the original design. It's not turned to the side, or it's not set way back as a separate garage. So I think that's interesting. Now, whether if something is interesting elevates it to the level that makes it significant, I'll let you decide that. But I certainly agree that it retains a high degree of integrity. Now, the windows have changed. That you can see the photograph that's being passed around up high. Those windows have been changed, but again, it doesn't. I don't think it doesn't change the overall reading of the original design. There's still sufficient integrity there. The next criteria is notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. The reason I emphasize those words, I think actually this criteria really, it seems to be implying a heavy, or not a heavy, but a high bar in terms of significance in terms of association with a significant designer. Now, in this case, the Reed Sutton House was designed by an architect, Edward G. Oldfest. of the Chicago-based architecture firm Oldfest and Williams, and I did some digging in archives and historical research to find out more about Mr. Oldfest. Apparently, he was originally from the Quad Cities area, but I guess what's notable here is he did designs in multiple cities and multiple places in Illinois and even some out of state as far away as South Dakota. So he's not just working simply in one community. I think that's interesting. The buildings that appear we can identify connected with this architect, Mr. Edward Oldfest. There's one at 1211 North LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago. It's a 1920s apartment building. There's the Manos building on South Dakota, Cottage Grove Avenue in Chicago. These are all, by the way, in your memo, and you can refer to them, so I'm not going to go over in detail. But then finally, there's the Delta Kappa Epsilon Fraternity House at 313 East John Street in Champaign. That's apparently another example. So, in city staff's opinion, let's see, make sure I get this correct. It does minimally qualify as a work of a master architect. Now, whether or not this is a notable work of that architect, or whether or not his individual genius has influenced an area, I'll let you all discuss that as well. But those are some things to think about. Certainly, we can identify this architect, and he's has done work basically in the Midwest and the Great Plains states. E, is this identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its unique location or physical characteristics? How I like to think of that, again, you can take this just for consideration. I like to think of that is, does the setting lend something unique about the building that it otherwise wouldn't necessarily be there? Is it set up to a degree? Is it on the bend of a river, or is it at the terminus of a roadway where you're looking down and seeing the building? So in those cases, I think those are attributes that can help support and show off the architecture of a building. In this case, I don't see that it clearly qualifies in that criteria. And then F and G, city staff's opinion, it doesn't qualify for F or G criteria because it's not a utilitarian structure, or we don't know anything about any archaeology, for instance, that would necessarily make the building qualify. We have some recommended findings, and the options are provided in your memo, but staff's recommendation is based on the memo, the research, the staff presentation, that you find that the landmark nomination minimally qualifies under criterion C, which is that architect criterion of section 12-5C of the Urbana zoning ordinance.
I'll just add in the communications that we did get from this. So we did receive a number of emails in support from people who could not attend this evening. So I will list their names. The first one is from Tom Garza, the Executive Director of PACA, the Preservation and Conservation Association of Champaign County, wrote and said that PACA's board does strongly endorse this application. Amy Ando of 712 West Michigan in support. Becky Mead, 607 West Michigan. Deborah Katz Downey, 209 West Delaware Avenue. Esther Patt, 706 South Kohler. Evelyn Shapiro, 311 West Illinois Street. Gail Walden, Georgia Green, 804 West Nevada. Tanya Story, 807 South Birch. Many of these are the same letters as for the last case. They did state in their emails that they were in support of both. Sarah Projansky and Kent Ono at 803 West Michigan Avenue. Chris Bertie at 411 West Nevada Street. Katie Hunter, 510 West Oregon Street. Lori Ratzman, 1107 South Busey. Michelle Nelson, 402 West Florida. Ming Kuo, 504 West Vermont. Sarah McAvoy at 805 West Michigan Avenue. Stanley Friedman, 716 West Michigan Avenue. Stuart Martin, 302 West Washington Street. Peggy Patton, 609 West Indiana. Anthony and Mary Eng, 803 West Indiana. And then we did receive one letter that was in opposition to the application, and that was from David Kriebel at 1706 Pleasant Street in Urbana, and that's the last one in your packet.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Has the owner had a written consent or a valid protest? Is there an update on how the owner?
You know, actually the owner asked to meet with us the other day. They asked a lot of questions. They're very interested and keen as to what's going to take place with the building, because obviously the owner. They have not submitted a protest for this at this point. They have not submitted a letter of support at this point. They said they were going to discuss and see how to proceed. So they can probably answer that better than I can, but they had a lot of questions about what would this mean for if it were landmarked. What's really the significance of the building? Where is the landmark application coming from? You know, why this building? Questions like that. So.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Robert, on the page 7 on the summary of findings, number 6, minimally qualifies for correct. Should that be D instead of C? Yeah, so let's just
You're
make
correct.
sure we correct that, so if we
That's
refer to it or
correction.
something.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
Also in the staff recommendation, it says C2.
right, okay.
Criterion D. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions, Robert? Okay, at this time, petitioner would normally speak and present their evidence. They're not here. Would the owner or the owner's representative like to speak? Ask questions. Really, what we're going to do is if you have questions for, I'm sorry. Okay, you'll be able to speak in the either proponent or opponent portion. Well, I'm sorry. It's my fault. But if you do have any questions that you would like regarding the application, they can answer them for you. Okay, at this time, we're going to allow proponents of the request that may have relevant information to present to the commission at this time. And there's a lot of you, so if you could, kind of keep it to a minute or so, that'd be great. And again, you will need to sign in again, and please state your address.
I'm Rich Cahill. I live at 307 South Orchard. I'm a member, past president of the Preservation Conservation Association, and as already read into record, our executive director, Tom Garr, supports this nomination. The one thing I'd like to speak of, because I'm personally involved, I am a chemist at the Illinois State Geological Survey, and I've been there 37 years or so. And I did not know Dr. Reed, but I knew of Dr. Reed. He had left well before I got on the scene, but the old-timers that I worked there knew Dr. Reed. And he was indeed a very influential chemist, and he was recognized nationally with the American Advanced Association of Scientists. The legacy of the work of the chemical group at the Illinois State Geological Survey and the benefiting the fluorspar industry in southern Illinois, the coal industry. He was very active in the oil and gas industry. So his legacy continues. I wish Robert would give this kind of speech, kind of praising what the scientific surveys do. We are now part of the University of Illinois. We're the Prairie Research Institute. But over the years, we've been independent. We've been part of the Department of Natural Resources. In our new role, I think we have better visibility, and I think we can even do more for the people of Illinois. And this is one of our pillars, one of our founding fathers in the School of Chemical Sciences and Geology. This particular house, the Joliet limestone, is another, talking about geology. If you go to some of the cities up north, Joliet, Aurora, you'll see the sandstone, limestone, kind of a pink, a creamy limestone all over the northern part of the state. To see that building material brought down here is unusual. I can't really think of too many other houses that use this building material, and maybe just in sort of an accent, but this really, this entire building is this building material, which I think is very unique. I think it blends, it's unique to the character of this Busey corridor. I think it's significant for that reason alone, and I think it meets several criteria and should be a local landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents that would like to speak at this time?
Thank you for the opportunity to do this. My name is Betsy Smith, and I live at 209 West Vermont, but I grew up in this house at 1207 South Busey. And so I'm here to thank you for the work that you guys do in protecting Urbana's historic houses and buildings. And I have a new appreciation for what you do, having sat here since 7 o'clock. Anyway, I'm excited by the opportunity to talk about this. I think it's a wonderful designation. I think my parents would be very pleased to have this happen. It is a wonderful house, and they did work very hard to maintain the integrity of it. And my dad, being a historian, well, both my parents really would be thrilled with this on that sort of level. And I just wanted to make one little point. The house was not sold to TCBC, to Twin City Bible. It was sold to an individual when it first sold. But anyway, I think that's basically what I wanted to say. I just think that it would be great if you guys were able to designate this a landmark. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
My name is Chris Wilcock, and I reside at 710 West Michigan Avenue in a home that has been in my family since 1956. I wish to speak in support of the petition to designate the Reed Sutton House at 1207 South Busey Avenue as a local historic landmark. I base my support for this request on two arguments. First, the house is deserving of the historic designation. While there are several other limestone-clad houses in West Urbana, no other houses combine the Joliet limestone exterior with the architectural distinction, quality of design, proportion, and construction exhibited by the Reed Sutton House. The house was designed by a significant Chicago-based architect who has few other local buildings to his credit, but designed several historic buildings in Chicago and other Midwestern cities. I grew up in the neighborhood of the Sutton House, and I've always been aware of the quality and distinction of this home and its position in West Urbana. The Reed Sutton House is, in my opinion, absolutely deserving of the local historic landmark designation. My second argument for adoption of the historic status for the Reed Sutton House is that the designation is necessary for the preservation of the structure and of the neighborhood. I believe that the members and leadership of the Twin City Bible Church, the current owners of the property, are honorable and well-meaning participants in West Urbana life, and that they genuinely want to manage their church affairs in a manner that is compatible with the interests of their neighbors. However, their business and fiduciary responsibility is not to maintain a historic single-family home, but to run a church. While I am confident that they will continue to provide basic maintenance on the structure, the long-term viability of the house is fundamentally incompatible with the church's business plan. This incompatibility is evidenced by the history of two other properties on the block owned by the church, the houses formerly located at 806 and 808 West Michigan. When the church acquired these two homes in the 1960s, both houses were at the time comparable in housing quality to other typical properties in the surrounding neighborhood. The church provided basic maintenance on both houses over the years, fixing the roof, painting, replacing a worn-out storm door, etc. But what the church did not do, and what I would never expect them to do, was to update those two homes to keep them up with changing housing norms and expectations. Since these houses were used as a classroom and office space, they weren't about to put in a new bathroom or additional bathrooms, a new kitchen cabinets, or new countertops, or even add on to the houses for additional square footage. As a result, after 30-plus years of their basic stewardship, it was easy for them to make the case that the two homes were hopelessly out of date, and the only reasonable course of action was to demolish them to replace them with a new, functional for them, education building. The Reed Sutton House provides an essential anchor to the block and to the corner on which it is located. Its presence completes and maintains the transition from the higher density properties allowed along Lincoln Avenue to the substantially owner-occupied, single-family home neighborhood existing along Busey Avenue and to the east. This is the stated goal, identifying the blocks of West Urbana between Lincoln and Busey Avenues as a transitional zone. The Reed Sutton House, residing at the top of a prominence on a corner lot, is essential to the preservation of the residential character of the surrounding neighborhood. While the members and leadership of the Twin City Bible Church have no current plans to replace the Reed Sutton House, and while I'm confident they will continue to maintain the structure adequately, I believe that the designation as a local historic landmark will help guide their future decisions regarding this house and provide the necessary impetus to find ways to integrate this structure so essential to the surrounding neighborhood in their future plans. Finally, if the church finds the Reed Sutton House isn't compatible with their future direction, the existence of the local historic landmark designation will help guide them in making choices about the property's disposition and its continued anchoring of a viable and desirable residential neighborhood.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents that would like to speak at this time?
My name is Kath Brinkman, and I live a half a block away from the Reed Sutton house. I live at 702 West Michigan, and I want to say that I believe that that house adds a lot of value to the neighborhood. It is a charming house. It is unique, and I would like to see our neighborhood keep that charm and uniqueness. So I am in support of the historic landmark designation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other proponents? Oh, we got two coming.
Dave Monk, 115 North Market, Champaign. This is a rather unsophisticated reaction, but I read all the details, and I for years regarded that house very highly. There's a whole bunch of people on that street from time to time. They've changed, but there's been people of quality who make those houses have character. And I would very much like to see this house remain as a house. And I think that the influence here goes further. Bob Sutton was in the Baptist Church. I think he was in the Graduate College at one stage when I was working with the Committee on Natural Areas. I just want to support this application.
Thank you.
Hi again, my name is Louise Cooney. I live at 801 West Indiana, in the property behind the home that Mr. Myers was kind enough to show pictures of, and our home, as you know, was designated as a local historic landmark, and it also won the 2013 Packet Residential Heritage Award. I'd like to stress a few points here, but I'd like to start off with the point that I made in the last application, which is that you know, my husband and I purchased this house with the understanding that it was in a protected corridor in the Lincoln-Busey corridor, and other people have also made comments about how that is supposed to be a transition. We never imagined that we would be discussing a variety of issues over the first year that we've lived here, including proposed demolitions and other things. So we would just urge you to stand by those guidelines in the Lincoln-Busey corridor document. As you can see, you have a groundswell of support here from the neighborhood. I've talked to a lot of the neighbors. Rebecca, I hope you don't mind me quoting you. Rebecca said, "Is it still true that you've never received this many comments?" Did you want to, I don't want to parse your words there.
Yeah, I think this is probably at least double the number of communications that I've received on any application.
So I think that lets you know how the people that actually live in the neighborhood feel about this. You know, the report by the students, I thought, looked good. I'm not a historian, I'm an epidemiologist, but you know, I understand that it might have had some weaknesses. I would just say, both for this situation and for others in the future, you know, people in this neighborhood, as been stated by many of my neighbors, are very, very interested in the historic value of these homes. And I was not able to access the staff comments on this report until Monday. And certainly I think that with more information, the application might be stronger. And I can say myself, I would be happy to do some of that research, having the experience from doing my own home, but I simply can't do it in 2 days. So I'd just like to make a comment that in the future it would be nice to have a little bit more warning on what the staff's comments are going to be, so that the neighbors could provide additional information as needed. to supplement that. What I'd really like to do here, and I think that you know that the neighborhood supports this, is I'd like to ask the church to support this. The church has made comments to the neighbors in a meeting that we had with them in November on a different issue, that they support the historic value of the properties that they own, and that they respect the neighbors. And I think that the comments here are clear that the preponderance of the neighbors' opinions is that this should be a historic landmark. And I would ask you tonight, if possible, to please give your consent to this application. That would really show us that you mean what you said previously. The neighbors and I want to protect this and other single-family homes in the Lincoln-Busey corridor to prevent other uses from creeping into a residential neighborhood. People with children do not want to live near other structures in many cases, especially when they bought a house that they thought was in a residential neighborhood, and then there's a threat of change. I'm the one that sent you this, sent Rebecca this Joliet limestone thing. It was relatively easy to find online, but the reason that I was prompted to look for that was that on PBS about maybe a month ago or so, there was a special about different things, historical status of things in Illinois. And there was an interesting thing about these Joliet limestone quarries, and I thought very interestingly that they weren't in business very long because, as is the case in Chicago with many things, the quarries in Illinois were unionized and the quarries in Indiana were not, and the price difference caused the Illinois ones to go out of business. But you have that document, and that's a serious document. It identifies this material as something that should be preserved. So please take that very seriously. A point on criteria E. That in my mind is a subjective criteria. My undergraduate degree is nursing. We can all talk about objective and subjective criteria in our various professions. And I think the second half of that criteria, it's kind of a mixed bag, talks about physical characteristics of the building. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Myers, about the physical location, but that's only half of it. The second half is or physical characteristics. And I think what you're hearing from the neighbors here is that this is a unique house. It is a landmark in the area. People notice it, people respect it, people love it, and it's become a part of the West Urbana neighborhood. So I would encourage each of you that are going to vote on this to consider that this is a subjective criteria, and that the subjective opinion of the neighbors is that it is significant. I'd also like to talk about, kind of preemptively, about increased cost, just to allay any concerns. And I didn't say anything at the last case, and perhaps I should have, but we just did all of this. And I really can tell you, I don't think we spent any extra money doing things in a historically respectful way than if we didn't. I really don't. We had to make some choices. And maybe that wouldn't have been my first choice, but I did it because it was the right thing to do. The roofing was easy to duplicate. The windows we restored for, I think, the same price, perhaps slightly more than if we had replaced them. I just cannot agree from my own experience with some of the assertions that were made earlier in this meeting about increased cost. And I don't want to bore you with all the details on that, but I just wanted to kind of say that preemptively here. We haven't found that to be the case at all. And the interior, it can be modernized in any way the owner sees fit. So I really don't understand that point of discussion. I'd just like to ask, as a matter of course here, will there be an opportunity for neighbors to comment after the owner comments or not? No. That's not a matter of procedure. Okay. And I wanted to state that, I nor any of the neighbors had anything whatsoever to do with this application. This was a surprise to all of us. And again, if we had known, we probably would have enhanced it in some ways, given more time. So the choices here, and I don't even know if these are appropriate for the votes or things that you can do here tonight. I think the first choice of the neighbors would be for the church to commit to what they have said in terms of being respectful of the neighbors and respectful of the historic nature of the neighborhood, consent to this, pass it tonight, and be done. That would be the first choice. The second choice would be obviously that you would approve this, but that we would be given sufficient time prior to the city council meeting to gather more information. And I'd like to know how much time we would have, because this can't be done overnight in terms of enhancing this application if that is necessary. And then choice number 3, if nothing else goes, would be to release the case without a decision and to allow, I don't know if that's possible, once this has been brought up, could it be 5 years from now? Could it be, it can never be brought up again?
It's, I think there's a limit of once per year, so it can come back again.
It could come back
Yes.
again.
Mhm.
Okay. Forget choice 3 then. Sorry. So choice 1 is that the church consents and respects the community, pass it tonight. Choice 2 would be to give us some perhaps extra time if that's possible, if it's going to go to the city council to do our research. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments from any proponents?
Hello again.
Could you state your name again?
I'm sorry. Yes, Carolyn Colston. I live at 710 West Indiana Avenue, right around the corner from this lovely house, and I'm here as a proponent to the application. My parents were professors at the University of Illinois. My father, an art historian. They lived in that house for over 45 years. Not that house, I'm sorry. Our house. For over 45 years. My husband and I have only lived there for 3 years. But always, whenever visiting my parents, we would walk around the neighborhood. It's such a great neighborhood to walk in. And always, my parents and everybody in our family would notice the beautiful house in question here tonight. I wish my father were here to speak to the architecture because he was so very knowledgeable. But it was the proportions, it was the color, it was the way it's set on the land, the way the porch looks, everything, you know, is just so very pleasing to the eye. And I too wish to speak to criteria E to say that I see it as a far, well, I see it differently. You know, I don't see that criteria as simply addressing the situation, the being on the bend of a river or a hill or something of that nature. I think it also goes to the unique features of the house. It's an incredibly noticeable house. It gives a sense of peace just to enjoy walking by it. And I would be very, very sorry to see anything ever change about that house. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any additional proponents?
My name's Brian Adams. I live at 410 West Elm Street in Urbana, and I'm here to support this nomination. I work at the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, one of the sister surveys, and I think it would be just wonderful to have the former owners who were also associated with the survey system have their house recognized as a local landmark. I think that would be really a good thing for the survey system. Basically, I just wanted to make one point regarding criteria C. It was argued that this house is not a high example of the Tudor English Revival style, but sort of a subtype, and I was just wondering if that alone would not argue for its significance, that it's not a typical example of what we call Tudor English Revival, but the fact that it's clad in stone makes it something very unique and therefore more valuable, more of educational value, and gives some sense of the variety and possibly rareness of this subtype, of this type of architecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Pete Colston. I live at 710 West Indiana Avenue. It's a beautiful neighborhood with the brick streets and the 150-foot high trees, and I live about half a block away from the Reed Sutton house, and I probably walked past that house a few hundred times, and you know, every time I walk by, I have to stop and look at it. It's so beautiful. I've tried a lot of stonework myself, and you know, that is some beautiful stonework. And you know, I hate to mention the domino theory. Those of us who grew up in the '60s are well aware of the domino theory, where you know, one country then the next country. Well, you know, these houses are beautiful, but you know, one goes and then another one goes. And you know, if you go from south to north on Busey Street, you can see the sort of decline in the neighborhood. And I've lived in a lot of places where they allow, you know, commercial development, and inevitably the neighborhoods behind it start to deteriorate. I don't know if you've ever been to USC, but you know, my mom went there in the '40s, and but now there's 30-foot high fences all around that place with razor wire, you know, and it's just sort of a slippery slope. And you know, putting a historic designation on this house, you know, could ensure that the neighborhood, you know, maintains its integrity. You know, those are a lot of beautiful houses in those neighborhoods, and you know, if you go down Elm Street and look at the Freeman House, you know, it's starting to deteriorate. Nobody is maintaining it, and you know, it's a very common tactic of these historic houses. If you just let them fall to pieces, and then, oh well, we have no choice but to demolish them because it'd be too expensive to maintain them. So I think by giving this house a historic designation, it'll help anchor that whole area to keep its historic nature. I just read the other day that in a few years we're going to have to take down our historic street signs. So you know, I think it would be great to, you know, put the limits now while we can. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other proponents? I have a point of clarification here. The bylaws state that at this point opponents can speak, and I don't know if the owner is an opponent or a proponent, but may they ask questions of evidence? So you may speak and ask any questions or
Ready? Good evening. My name is David Thies. I'm a lawyer with the firm of Weber and Thies in Urbana 202 Lincoln Square. We are speaking as an opponent to the petition. I'm also, for what it's worth, the great-great-great-grandson of D.R. Weber, who was one of the early settlers of this area. I have a connection to the house here, in that Bob Sutton was my father's advisor when he was a history student at the U of I. None of that makes me in favor necessarily of historic preservation, but I can tell you that our firm does not lightly take on the representation of an owner that is opposing this designation, and yet that's the position I find myself in. I'd like to introduce Brian Bloom, who is the ministry board chairperson and a trustee of the church, who will speak on behalf of the church.
Well, good evening. Before I start, I'd just like to recognize our neighbor in the back here who acknowledged the good intentions of the church and the fact that we have intentions of being good neighbors where we find ourselves. And that's a compliment we don't take lightly, and it is one of the goals of Twin City Bible Church to be good neighbors amongst those in whom we find ourselves. With me tonight in the audience are two former ministry board chair people, spanning probably a tenure of 7 chair people, and so that is just evidence that Twin City Bible Church is sound. It has long-term members. It's not necessarily a transient church in its membership, although we do see a revolving door in regards to students coming in and out. But the overall membership is strong and it's stable. And also, along with me are a couple fellow board members, Rob Gill and Elaine Wagner, who are in the audience tonight. Twin City Bible Church has been an Urbana institution for 80 years. We were founded in 1933, and by 1936, TCBC found its first permanent home at the corner of Springfield and Matthews in Urbana. In 1962, construction began at its current location at the corner of Lincoln and Michigan. TCBC has been a good neighbor of the West Urbana community for 51 years. This evening I'm speaking on behalf of the 239 members of TCBC. And if the number of proponents and opponents is important, we'd like to see the records show that there are 239 voices in opposition to this application. Twin City Bible Church opposes the application because of 2 primary reasons. While TCBC believes that it's important to preserve historical properties, our first reason for objecting is that we just don't believe this property is historical. I'd like to draw your attention to the criteria for selection found on pages 3 and the following. And of the 7 criteria that were cited tonight upon which you evaluate a property, 6 have been found by the staff to lack sufficient documentation or merely fails the criteria. Only 1 has been evaluated to minimally qualify the property. The applicant, Elisa Lorini, was asked in the application to indicate which criteria apply to the property. Of the 7 criteria which your packet tonight includes, Ms. Lorini did not indicate that the property met the criteria that the property was a notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced the area. So of the 7 criteria, your packet indicates that the property does not meet the criteria of 6 of them as shown by the staff. And the applicant did not believe that the property met the criteria for the 7th. Since you're evaluating this property based on the application, I'd request that you find the application is not worthy of further consideration. Perhaps if Ms. Lorini was present tonight, she could shed some light on why she did not find that the Reed Sutton House meets this criteria that staff sees minimal support for, but unfortunately she's not here tonight. The second reason TCBC opposes this application is that we believe that the inclusion of this property will in some way diminish the good work of the commission in years past. The 12 residences that you have designated as local landmarks are truly historic. They've been owned or lived in by the city of Urbana mayor in 1874 and 1875, the Urbana mayor in 1917 through 1919, a 4-term mayor, a 3-term mayor, who is also a significant civil engineer and real estate developer, the person who was significant in the establishment of the university's architectural program, the owner of the first movie theater in Urbana, postmaster of Urbana, and a home visited by Abraham Lincoln. Although the contributions of the Reeds and the Suttons are important, so are many of the other residents of the West Urbana neighborhood. However, they don't just stack up to this rich history of previously designated landmarks. In regard to the architect, most of Mr. Oldfest's work is evident in the Chicago area. His only other contribution in Champaign-Urbana is in Champaign and is not a residential property. The city of Urbana has identified the 100 most important buildings in Urbana and the architects of those buildings. There are 16 architects of these buildings. Mr. Oldfest is not one of them. Many of the properties you have given landmark status to are the work of Urbana's architect, Joseph Royer. He is also the architect of other properties not yet designated with landmark status. Perhaps it would be better to consider more of his work before you consider this one. And speaking of the 100 most important buildings in Urbana list, the Reed-Sutton House is not on that list, but there are many more that you have already identified as important. Perhaps they should be considered for landmark status before the Reed-Sutton House. And I've also spent the weekend reading the Historic Preservation Plan of the City of Urbana, dated July 6, 1998. And it cites numerous residences that are the most historically significant. I didn't look them all up, but I did look at the property at 804 West Main, and by appearance, I can see why it's stated in the preservation plan, yet I do not believe that it has received landmark status. Perhaps the homes in the preservation plan should be considered before the Reed-Sutton House. The emphasis of our second main reason for our opposition is that we, as property owners in the city of Urbana, for 51 years, recognize that the Historic Preservation Commission has done an excellent job in years past. We believe that the inclusion of the Reed-Sutton House will lower the bar of what is considered worthy of landmark status, and that there are many other properties that would continue to keep the bar high and preserve the Commission's excellent work towards preservation. While the members of Twin City Bible Church are in favor of keeping historically significant properties significant, the Reed-Sutton House is just not a historically significant property, and there are others more worthy, and we oppose this application and ask the Commission to deny the application. Do you have any questions for me? Yes?
No, if I just didn't quite understand you, it was maybe just after the middle you were talking about the architect.
Yes.
And how he designed the one in Champaign, and then you said something about residential, or it is or it's not, or what?
The property in Champaign is not a single residence. It's a
it's residential,
I believe a
but
fraternity
not
house, right?
Yeah, but okay. It just kind of went really fast by me, and I didn't know what exactly
No
you
problem.
said.
Sometimes I go a little too fast.
Okay.
I apologize.
All right. Well, I understood the rest just fine.
Good.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll allow the.
I guess I really just have a kind of a statement. You know, you listed off a bunch of buildings that were done by certain architects or have been owned by or lived in by mayors, past mayors, you know, very important people. But we've also recently nominated and landmarked a hotel. Again, it was built by Royer, but no one, you know, lived there that was, you know, historically significant. So I don't think that you can use the argument that we can only nominate and or landmark places where very historically significant people either owned or lived.
I base my comments on single-family residences. I fully acknowledge that there are other landmarks in the city of Urbana, but I was trying to limit my research to those properties that might be similar to ours for context.
Understood. Thank you.
And actually, the hotel was owned for many years by my grandfather, Judge Charles Weber, who was a local, historically significant person.
Right. Was, but not when we nominated it and or landmarked it. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I make one last comment?
Sure.
Because some of the proponents of the application indicated perhaps the need to limit the use of the property. And in terms of keeping our word to the neighbors, I just want to reiterate that we fully understand the zoning laws, the current zoning laws that we live under in that corridor, and we also understand that there's a Lincoln-Busey design guidelines, all of which that we would have to fall under in order to properly use that property. And so giving it a historic landmark designation just to make it a little bit harder, I'm not sure makes it all that much harder, because it already is with the guidelines and the different zoning issues that we would have to face.
I'll mention the legal argument last, just that you'll notice we're not talking about cost or those kinds of things. We believe the Urbana ordinance means something that you're operating under. If it doesn't, then you would just approve every application. I assume there are some applications that you would deem not worthy of being approved. We think this is that one. We ask that you abide by your ordinance. We think this is a marginal application. Doesn't mean anything about the property being bad or the church not being willing to take care of it. But the ordinance means something, and your staff has largely said it's marginal.
Thank you. And we're going to allow other opponents to speak. Is there any other opponent that would like to speak at this time? Is there anyone that would like to speak that does not have an opinion but would like to present some evidence? Okay. Are there additional comments by the staff?
I have one just very minor thing. The last speakers mentioned 804 West Main Street as one of the properties that should be considered for landmarking, and it actually is. It is a landmark. The 800 block of West Main is a historic district. Yeah, and so that all the properties on there are included in the landmark registry.
So at this time, the petitioner usually summarizes their petition, but due to the fact that they're not present, I'm going to ask if there are any other questions before I close the public input portion of the public hearing. No other questions? Then we will close the public input portion of the meeting, and now it's time for us to discuss this. May I have some comments, please?
I'll make one on the stone again. In my mind, that falls under C, use of indigenous materials. Indigenous to the state of Illinois, maybe not to Urbana, but I think it's a very more impressive feature of the house than the architectural style. Not that the architecture of the house is displeasing, but I have a hard time really fitting that house into anything that has Tudor associated with it. But I do think it's an impressive use of that type of stone, and somewhat if not unique if not unique in Urbana. And I think that's, in my mind, could qualify the house under C.
I also wanted to talk about C. It does have some of the characteristics of the English Revival with its asymmetrical plan. It's got the tall, narrow casement windows on the first floor. The ones have been replaced up above, and they usually are in groupings like ribbons. And if you do a little research on this, they talk about the cross-gabled, medium to steep pitched roof and asymmetrical roofs. And it does look like there are, I mean, it does have an asymmetrical elevation with these cross gables that they seem to line up. I mean, from the front to back. Walking around it, I couldn't tell for sure, but they sure appear to have that cross-gabled look. And I too think that there is value in that the stone veneer, the Joliet limestone. And my understanding was that the Joliet limestone, that was kind of, the 1920s is when it started to go. The Indiana limestone started to take over, and it became less of a building material. So it's kind of unique that in the 40s it was finding its way down here. But I'm interested. I'm open for anybody's opinion on C. I do find some of the characteristics for English Revival, and I'm just wondering if anybody else does, or if I'm
I probably just don't know what it is, I guess. So I'll plead ignorance on the architectural style.
What I had written down for C was that it definitely does seem to be representative of an architectural type, and not an architectural type, but it definitely shows the use of indigenous materials and retains a high degree of integrity. So I think it does qualify under C very easily. I'm also really interested in that we've got two people who are that associated with the surveys, a head of a survey and the head of the geochemical division, I think. So I think that it is a significant value of the social and civic heritage of the community. So I would say it qualifies under A.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, direct this mostly to the opponents, but also recognizing the proponents. Just to say that staff recommendations are not necessarily our judgment. It's this group's responsibility to synthesize all the input that we get and carefully read the application packet, and in my case, kind of do some side research, try to get to know who these people were to make those kind of evaluations. So that's, that's something I think that's important to note. For the entire community's benefit, I want to comment on the not on the 100 list thing that you brought up. Believe me, there was significant horse trading and people who wanted to pull houses in and out, and this commission worked on this for hours to try to limit ourselves to 100 houses, and that was kind of our direction. So for anyone who may think they have a property that has historical significance, are people that currently own houses that aren't on that 100 list. It was our start with that, but wasn't meant to be an exclusive set of homes that we would only consider it, being brought before this group to evaluate. The other thing, I don't know, this may not be real germane, but to the proponents of the application, so I guess this is my chance to say this, there is a system where you have design and review board that overviews this. So please know that although I respect the comments that you've made about wear down and tear down and the domino effect, it's my job right now to focus very narrowly on this single property and to try to make a judgment about how it fits into our ordinance in the context of historic properties. So I appreciate that dialogue, and I make that comment mostly to try to advise you or cajole you, go to those Lincoln-Busey corridor meetings, get to know your design and review board representatives, work with staff so that you have a real firm footing about what that board can or can't do as changes happen in your neighborhood. To follow up on something that Joan said, I think the two residences noted by the title of this application did provide measurably to their fields, and in the case of Professor Reed, contributed greatly in the advancements of what we might think of petrogeologic chemistry. And it occurs to me that we're still sitting in the Illinois Basin, one of the largest and maybe potentially most active coal mining areas in this part of the United States. And regardless of how you feel about that, his work was seminal in our understanding of what some of the practical applications of those materials were. And so, Joe and I agree with you that B is, although I think you said A, so I'm not sure. I've got to read through this after I talk a bit here. But that those people are of note, not mayors, but I mean, you understand the dominance of the University of Illinois in the context of the community in Urbana, and how it would be only right for us to recognize academic excellence and scholarship as well as political note. So the other criteria that I'd like to open up is, or maybe just add to, I'm losing track here just a bit, is E. Because as I drive the area, as I've listened to the comments, as I've listened to staff, I think that we can probably make a fairly good case on that criteria also. And it kind of doubles up on C in terms of the use of the indigenous material, but I think it really does make that unique. Most of what people have spoke about tonight is how that's such a unique part of the neighborhood, how that total rare limestone facade kind of sets it apart from the rest of the building. So I guess the criteria that I have in play right now are B, C, and E, just to throw that out.
I'm not sure we can overlook Oldafest either. You know, notable architect. I think that maybe he didn't work down here that much, but that makes it all the more unique in a way.
Yeah, I agree with Joan. I originally, when I looked over the packet, was thinking that B, C, D, and E, that it could qualify under all four.
Any additional comments?
Okay, well, you guys know me, so I've got a motion ready. Move that in case number HP 2013 L02, the Historic Preservation Commission find that the application received April 8th, 2013 for 1207 South Busey, the Reed Sutton House, conforms with criteria B, C, D, and E of Section 12.5.c of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance as a local historical landmark. Specifically, we find that the Reed Sutton House was the residence of two notable scientists and scholars who contributed measurably to their fields, and in Professor Reed's case, contributed greatly in the advancement of geochemistry. C, employs a unique use of indigenous materials, specifically the Joliet limestone used on the facade. That may not be a real good term to use, and retains a high degree of integrity. Is the design of noted Chicago architect Edward Oldfest, whose work in Central Illinois is not often seen and retains a very high degree of integrity. And finally, is an established and unique feature of the community owing to its, I guess I'll say, peculiar limestone construction. That's the end of it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Do we have a discussion on the motion?
I have, I don't know that I disagree with any of the findings that the motion's based on. I think I agree with some more than others, but I don't disagree with any of them enough to vote against it, because I think one of them's maybe a little more marginal in my mind, but certainly not. I don't think any of the findings you've mentioned are inaccurate, and I could support the motion.
Well, you know, Trent, I mean, I'd entertain changes. I mean, I think it's important that we try to present the council with as, you know, firm a grasp of the reason as we can. You know, we could eliminate one of the criteria or modify the descriptions that I've used. I mean, you know, I just typed this up from the work that I did on this. So, yeah, man, whatever you want to do.
Like I said, I have stronger feelings maybe about the architect and the limestone, whether that's under C or if it comes around in E. But I can't say that I disagree with, like I said, I'm stronger about something than others, but I don't know. Anybody else have a thought?
I thought there was maybe a little bit of overlap on the limestone, but I don't feel strongly as long as it's mentioned once. But for me, I mean, I think that the people who live there are very important and contributed greatly to this community and to our knowledge. But I do feel that probably we can stick. I think I would probably go with is it C, with the use of indigenous materials, and maybe eliminate E. But I don't feel strongly about that. I think they're all important. So I can absolutely go along with what you, with your motion.
I guess this E covers the people that think that raised corner, no landscaping, you notice it, makes it prominent, and falls under the established and visual feature. So if it were a different, you know, there some bigger bushes and it weren't the limestone, you might not notice it so much if it weren't so different than what you see around. But it's not that way. So I can see that.
Are you ready to vote on the motion? Is there any more discussion? If there's no discussion, let's have a roll call.
Mr. Dossett?
Yes.
Mr. Seiler?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yep.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Stoltz?
Yes.
Ms. Peluso?
Yes.
Motion carries. This will now, our recommendation will go to the City Council on
June 17th.
June 17th. Thank you very much. The public hearing is closed, and now we'll go back to our regular meeting. Alice? Oh.
Thank you to all of you for your great endurance tonight. Our meetings are not usually this long, I promise. Next item is new business, and we have none. Next item, number 10, is monitoring of historic properties.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the kind of the specific condition that the Gus Freeman House finds itself in right now. And as I emailed Rebecca just a couple of days ago, and the agenda had already gone out, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but as I look at our ordinance, I don't see any stick. and the condition of that house makes me wonder, where we get the stick here. It's 10:30, so I get some smack, right? And as I mentioned to Rebecca, you could tell the current owners that you were going to take the listing away from the property. They'd be fine with that. You could try to backtrack and see whether or not there were, and I don't have that memo in front of me that I sent, but the other thing I remember thinking about was that you could look and see whether there were any local tax rebatable, or if they had applied for building permits that we had given them, whether that kind of benefit could be taken back, or this is totally, a different kind of head, whether or not the community values these properties highly enough that you actually get more aggressive with property condition, and whether instead of city staff going over and trimming a bush and charging them $50 an hour, somebody hires a roofer and roofs it and then bills the property owner, or something like that. I just kind of wanted you guys to hear that. A lot of the dialogue that we had tonight, one of the opponents said that we take our responsibilities seriously, and I think we need to keep on doing that at the other end of the process. The other property that I've been really concerned about is the one that's in my neighborhood, which is the Greek Revival Cottage on Weber Street. And so the more you look at some of these buildings that we've landmarked, the more I think we need to be creative about what kind of assistance we can give them, what kind of sticks we can use to try to get people to do maintenance. So anyway. That was it.
Scott did send me an email last Friday, so I am prepared to give a quick status update on 502 and 504 West Elm. And then Robert Myers can speak a little bit about what our historic preservation ordinance can and can't do, and what our other tools in the maintenance of our landmarks, what our other tools are to achieve that goal. So on 502 and 504 West Elm Street, we have received a number of complaints. We've received complaints at this level from Brian Adams came and spoke to us at a couple of meetings, you'll remember, last fall. We've also received tenant complaints in our office about the buildings. Those were in September and October of last year. So at that time, some interior and exterior violations were noted. The interior violations were corrected. The exterior violations have not been corrected. We then did our building housing inspector, that's part of our rental registration program, did an inspection, a systematic inspection of both buildings, went into every unit in both buildings, and wrote a first notice of violations on February 19th, and a second notice was sent on April 15th. So that's the standard practice when there are violation notices. You're given a time period to comply. If you don't comply, you're then given a second warning, and then changes need to start happening. And if they are significant, then often the property owner will come in and meet with the building safety department and come up with a plan on how they're going to meet or correct those violations. I mean, some of them are very simple things. They were things like, this fire alarm isn't working, this smoke detector is not installed properly. Those things are relatively simple. Well, the fire alarm's maybe not simple to take care of. But some of them were very easy things that they could fix right away. Other things require a significant investment in terms of time on how to figure out how to deal with those things, particularly as they are both landmarks. Exterior work needs, a level of review that they need to consider. So they have, so multiple violations were noted both on the inside and the outside of both buildings, and all vacant units in both buildings have been required to remain vacant until all violations on both buildings, well, separately, but for each building, until all violations have been corrected. Half of the units in each building are currently vacant, and so they will need to remain vacant until they're brought up to code, the property maintenance code, that is. We did, last week on May 31st, our building safety department and myself, we met with representatives from the owner, Campus Property Management, CPM, regarding the violations and their plan for addressing those violations. They have an architect working on some of the exterior issues. They have their, I'm not sure what his title was, but he's basically like their contractor, but he works just for them, working on other issues, and then there are issues that they're working together on trying to mend. So they have already corrected the things that they can do easily, and they are developing a plan, which they will be submitting within about a week to the Building Safety Department on how they're going to come up to code on the rest of their issues. So they will actually, I'm sure, be requiring some review on some of the different things that they're planning to do. One of the big issues that they have are windows. Their windows don't meet the property maintenance code for rental properties. Windows need to be able to be opened, and something else that a lot of them don't meet. And there needs to be a window in every sleeping room that can be opened. And so there are different things that are going to require review by this board. So you'll be hearing more about those two properties. But we have been working with them since last fall, actively trying to get them to bring up the maintenance level on the properties. And Robert can now talk about the different tools that we have and why we, even though some of the complaints came to this body, the preservation body, about them being landmarks and not being maintained, why we used the property maintenance code to try and effect changes.
Well, this falls under monitoring of historic properties, so I think one of the best things that this group can do, can alert folks if something is going wrong. If you see something, let us know. We can follow up on it. The Building Safety Division, I think they do about 8,000 inspections a year, and they do those on a two bases. One is a complaint basis, and the other one is on a rotating regular basis. And so these two properties, it happens to converge two things. One, number of complaints we received, and then plus at the same time came around to the regular and ongoing inspections. So it not only has undergone building inspection, but also fire department has also inspected these buildings. They need a lot of work. There's no question about that. I've spent probably 45 minutes speaking with the architect who was hired by CPM to do an evaluation. And speaking with the architect about what does the landmark status mean in terms of if I want to make these changes, what's the process, what are the standards? If I want to make these changes, what are the process and the standards? And we've talked about a number of things pretty much in depth, but the bottom line is they've got to make major improvements to the buildings. There's just no way around that. They're going to be required to. Now, I think we've gone a change in how we go about inspections. You know, kind of, and I'll call this the old days, if you want to call it that. But for a long time, we always want to get compliance with the codes, but for a long time we let a judge assign fines, and sometimes those were very, if it got all the way to going to the judge, sometimes they could be very significant fines, you know, in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. But now we have a newish system that we've devised. I understand it's writing tickets, and so for some violations we can actually just write tickets, and it's a lot. For certain things, it's helpful. And some things you don't need to write a ticket because they can just go ahead and get it done. But if it's not working, you've got to try different things. So these two properties need work. They need help, and we appreciate when people alert us. The only other thing I would mention is even the police who are in the patrol cars and constantly driving around, they still need the 911 system. They still need people reporting things. You know, in other words, kind of eyes on the street helps the police respond, and so it also helps us respond if you see something happening and let us know. Now under the ordinance, it's interesting. Under the ordinance, we review changes to exterior properties, changes that are initiated by the property owner. But neglect isn't really a willful, well, sometimes it is willful, sometimes it's not. But neglect is not necessarily an active application. You don't fill out an application to, you know, neglect a property. So the trigger is not there for review sometimes when someone neglects a property. But what we do have is we have the property maintenance and code inspections. So I think that's probably the best way to go about it. If you see something wrong, let us know, and we can follow up with the inspectors, the property maintenance codes.
To me, there's a fine line, and that line has been crossed recently for 502 West Elm Street. And Brian Adams supplied photographs of some of the tenants in that building barbecuing some of the gingerbread off the porch. Mm-hmm. To me, that represents an action that changes the integrity of the building, and they did so without a certificate of appropriateness. Mm-hmm. So I think it's gotten so severe that it's crossed that line. I mean, it's beyond even a conscious state of disrepair in this case. So what happens? I mean, I think that those photographs were forwarded to the city. So in the maintenance code handbook, then what happens when somebody barbecues gingerbread?
Well, that's not in the maintenance code, the barbecuing gingerbread. But I think they're going to have to put it back, and if they want to put it back differently than what was there previously, they're going to have to ask you to approve that.
So then, how have they been cited for making a change without a certificate, or how does that process work?
Technically, I don't know if it's changed or not. If it fell off the building and someone picked it up off the ground and tried to burn it, I don't know if that is technically a certificate of a certificate of appropriateness triggered activity, but they've got to put it back. They have to put it back right. So we'll have to.
So how do they know they have to put it back? Have they gotten notice from the city, or is that something that we'll be able to do?
We've met with them.
Regarding the gingerbread?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, so when we were forwarded that information, I called their representative, and he went out and delivered a letter to all units in the building that day saying that this is not appropriate. He did mention that they had some problem tenants that they had actually, I think they had evicted, and they kept breaking back into the building, and he thinks it was those tenants doing this. There were a couple of police calls on the same tenants as well, and so it was certainly nothing that the property owner instigated, intended to happen, et cetera, and did do what he could to try and ensure that that wouldn't happen again. And they are aware that it does need to be replaced. Same situation with that 504, the Capitol, that fell a number of years ago, and that too, under our ordinance, I'm not sure that legally we could say that's a willful act, and so therefore is an activity that requires review by any of us. That fell. We know that fell. No one climbed up there and took it down, and but they are planning to replace them. They have actually already contacted the person who's going to be doing the mill work for the Capitol and the decorative work on 502.
Right. For instance, speaking with the architect, he had questions like, if we put it back in wood exactly the way it was, what's the review process for that? If when we wanted to replace it with FIPON instead of wood, would we need to, what would be the approval process for that? So I know they're working on it.
One other thing I can say about that is, so the architect actually, he was at this meeting that we had last week, and he had the staff reports and the applications for both of the properties, and had clearly read them, knew what this body had said was significant, knew what the application contained and what it talked about the architecture, and was referring to it and saying, we're planning to do this and we're hoping to do that, and while referring to the application and looking at the photos in the application. So they are aware of and trying to respect in their plans to do some work, the landmark designation for both of the properties. I also forgot to mention that the owner, Campus Property Management, has also said that they would be willing to sell the properties, and I did. I sent that I forwarded that to the WUNA listserv in case there was anyone on that listserv that would be interested. I did also send it to PACA and ask them to include it in some type of publication email. I'm not sure that they actually have done that, but they are willing to sell. If you know anyone who might be willing to purchase one or both of them. And then one other point. So with the property maintenance code, we have more authority and power, I think, with rental properties. And so these are both rental properties because they're part of our rental registration program. The property that, Scott, you mentioned on Weber Street is, or at least it was, I haven't looked at it recently, but single-family residential owner-occupied. And so we did work with our housing inspector on that property as well to get the owner to paint it a number of years ago. It hadn't been painted, and the wood we were worried about the wood. And so we used, even though it was an owner-occupied single-family house, we did use our property maintenance code to try and get the owner to paint it, which she did do. So I have not been by the property recently and have not heard any negative reports, so if you have something you want to pass along, you can send me an email.
Anything else on monitoring? If not, we'll go to staff report. Something quick.
Quick. If you go to landmarks.org, you'll have an opportunity to sign up for the Statewide Preservation Conference. It's going to be held in Evanston this year, June 27th through 29th, Hotel Orrington in Evanston. So this is going to be in conjunction with Landmarks Illinois, their annual membership meeting. They're having a mixer on Thursday night. We have a day and a half of fantastic sessions. One full day is actually devoted to Illinois Historic Preservation Commissioner mentoring and training. It's called the CAMP program. So it's in the spirit of, remember as a child when you went to camp, and the camaraderie that you had and the good memories that you had? No? Those are bad memories, maybe? Okay, well, scratch that. It was nothing like that. Anyway, this is probably, I think, the best chance that maybe any of us will have in our tenure in terms of training for historic preservation commissioners. It's being conducted by our friends at the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, and there's substantial reimbursements that are made possible as a certified local government, which we are. I think there's up to $1,200 per community for reimbursements for this, and could include hotel, travel, etc. So it's a fantastic opportunity for training. So landmarks.org. Please take a look at the program, and if you're interested, let us know.
Anything else?
Two of our commissioners have registered. Trent and Alice are both going, and Robert and I will both be there. I attended the camp a couple of years ago, actually early on at my time in the city, to try and learn more about preservation commissions and procedures and so on, and it was very useful. It really was. It was very good. And I don't know if you've seen the agenda for the other sessions. They look fantastic. Mm-hmm. Robert is responsible for much of that.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is study session, and I'm going to ask in the interest of time if we can delay that. Do you want to, yeah, stop it.
I think we'll probably need to meet in July anyway, so that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Announcements. I'm sad to announce that Joan Stoltz has preferred not to be reinstated on the commission, so this is Joan's last meeting with us after serving a 3-year term, and I want to thank you for your participation.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
And, you know, come visit. You can be in the audience now.
I will be in the audience, and I'll volunteer, too.
Excellent. Excellent. So, also I wanted to announce, will this pick up on the camera? At Home Magazine, there we go. At Home Magazine that's published by the News Gazette. This is the April, May, June issue. Has a feature on the Colvin House, a local landmark at 604 West Pennsylvania Avenue. And it's an outstanding story on the transformation of the house that they purchased when it had been substantially damaged by fire. And one of my favorite pieces is where they have a section in particular on this side on the local landmarking designation and how important that that was to get a financial incentive and make the numbers work a little better on the project. So if you get a chance, At Home Magazine, April, May, June, for the house of Marianne and Jed Bunyan. News Gazette, and I've seen it in stores. I've seen it in art galleries around town, and might be in grocery stores even. You can look at mine. Any other announcements? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Mr. Dossett, seconded by Kim Smith. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned. Thank you.